Beneath a sky choked with ash and the ghosts of fallen banners, the battlefield lay silent yet heavy. The warrior stood alone amidst the ruins of an entire era. Once the singular enemy of all, he now walked among the fallen as the last witness to a war that had consumed legends. The banners of fallen clans lay tattered in the wind, their symbols broken like the world they once ruled. Yet his story did not end in silence. The truth behind his survival was revealed, not through mercy, but through mastery. This was the tale of the man who faced the world. From a distance, a lone man pulled a sword from a defeated warrior. Before him stood three martial masters unmoving: the Shaolin abbot Hian Jinqian, Manhwa sect leader Jianghu, and the head of the Namgang clan, Namgang Huang. Namgang Huang shouted, declaring that the man was definitely worn out and that they must kill him now. The lone man looked at them with a fierce tone and spoke, saying that now only they remained. Hian Jinqian stepped forward and spoke, uttering Amitabha and telling them to prepare themselves. In an instant, the lone man appeared right before Hian Jinqian's face without warning and attacked. Hian Jinqian barely dodged and immediately fell back. He spun his staff and shouted, calling the lone man demonic god and a fiend before performing a technique known as the Great Buddha Palm. A burst of chi fired toward the lone man. The lone man, known as the demonic god, braced himself for the attack, but just as it was about to strike, he leaped high into the air, dodging it completely. Mid-air, now directly above Hian Jinqian, he readied himself for a strike and descended with his sword, shouting that he would kill the Shaolin abbot first. Hian Jinqian blocked the blow with his staff, groaning from the impact so powerful it sent nearby rocks flying. As he struggled to hold the attack at bay, he cried out in desperation, asking the others what they were doing and insisting that now was the time. At his call, Jianghu and Namgang Huang rushed toward the demonic god and swiftly disrupted the assault on the Shaolin abbot. After passing through, both halted mid-air at a distance and performed their techniques simultaneously, Jianghu unleashing Plum Blossom Flash and Namgang Huang invoking 10,000 Thunders return as one, before shouting in unison for the demonic god to die. Their attack struck the demonic god's right shoulder. He screamed in pain as blood gushed from his mouth. From behind, Hian Jinqian spun his staff and launched another strike, shouting for the demonic god to be reborn in paradise. But the demonic god leaped upward again, dodging the blow. Hian Jinqian was shocked by his speed despite having just endured a combined assault from the Manhwa sect leader and the head of the Namgang clan. He gasped in disbelief. The demonic god spun midair and descended at insane speed toward Hian Jinqian. In an instant, the Shaolin abbot fell to the ground, decapitated. The demonic god stood holding Hian Jinqian's head, his spine pulled out from his body, and turned toward the remaining two with a grin, simply saying, "Next." Jianghu and Namgang Huang stood frozen in horror and disbelief, muttering that he was a monster. The demonic god then charged toward them. Namgang Huang instantly backed away while Jianghu remained rooted in place. Namgang Huang shouted for him to get back, but it was too late. Jianghu faced the attack and blocked it with his sword. The demonic god pushed through with a grin on his face. That lone man, known as Jiang Qian, had single-handedly drowned the Central Plains in blood. To slay him, the elites of all 9 great sects had gathered. Yet against the strength hailed as the greatest under heaven, the alliance had been driven to the brink of annihilation. As Jiang Qian and Jianghu clashed blades, Jiang Qian grinned and asked the old man if he had prepared the trap. Jianghu responded that it was ready. It was Jiang Qian's grave, and executed his technique, Endless Plum Blossom Rain. As the Plum Blossom attack surged toward him, Jiang Qian gripped his sword tightly and recalled a memory, thinking to himself that it was not yet time, that he could not die yet. Raising his sword, he performed the Namgang sword art, 5th form, Black Dragon Demon Slaying Slash. Intercepting the Plum Blossom assault, his strike continued forward and landed squarely on Jianghu, who screamed in agony as blood erupted from his body and mouth, dying instantly. To Jiang Qian's surprise, another attack struck him from behind. Namgang Huang had launched his technique, Sovereign Without Hindrance. The blow landed fast and true. Jiang Qian gritted his teeth in pain and thought to himself that Namgang, that rat bastard, had really hurt him. But then, recalling another memory, his grimace twisted into a wild smirk as he located Namgang Huang mid-attack and declared that it only tickled. Namgang Huang was stunned and cried out in disbelief. Jiang Qian raised his sword and delivered a powerful slash that severed Namgang Huang's left fingers, carved wounds across his body, and sliced his face horizontally. Namgang Huang leaped backward mid-air, screaming in pain, and clenched his teeth as he thought to himself that Jiang Qian, that filthy cultist of the demonic sect, would not escape so easily. He rolled through the air, kicked off nothingness, and with a flash of lightning, rushed toward Jiang Qian. Bouncing around in a blur of motion, He surrounded Jiang Qian with his lightning technique before halting directly behind him and driving his sword forward with a yell to die already. The strike pierced Jiang Qian's back. Namgung Huang declared that his stubborn life ended there. Jiang Qian clenched his jaw as another memory surged through his mind. He whispered that yes, it ended here. Namgung Huang, still pinning him with the embedded sword, stammered in confusion. Jiang Qian then screamed violently, blood spewing from his mouth as he roared that it ended, that this cursed fate ended now. He drove his own sword into his chest, the blade passing through his body and impaling Namgung Huang as well. Namgung Huang shrieked in pain. Jiang Qian yanked the sword free, spun around, gripped it with both hands, and swung it with such force that it severed Namgung Huang's head clean off. As his head flew away, Namgung Huang's final thought was one of utter disbelief. How could Jiang Qian still move after having his heart pierced? Had he truly surpassed human limits? Was this the demonic god? With that, Namgung Huang died. As the sun rose, the 9 great sects lay annihilated. In the center of the battlefield, only Jiang Qian remained standing. He lowered his sword and began murmuring names softly, Yamhua, Seok Ah, Young Ah, and asked if this had been enough. A flash of memory rushed through his mind, a group of children ganging up on a single boy, shouting at him for his arrogance. Suddenly, a grown man grabbed the feisty child from behind, lifting him as the boy flailed with kicks and punches. The man asked why the boy was striking him. Watching this memory, Jiang Qian wondered if this was his life flashing before his eyes. It had been so long since he had seen his master's young face. He reflected that his path in the martial world had begun there, with daily brawls just to survive, a wandering life with only a sword in hand and no place to settle. To live through each day, someone had to die. It was an endless cycle of meaningless killings. Could such a life hold any meaning? Was life truly this fleeting? His memories continued, pausing as the image of a woman appeared. She had once told him she understood that feeling, that she too clashed with people daily at the marketplace. In this world, if you did not see everyone as an enemy, you would not last long. Comforting her younger siblings whenever they craved special treats was no easy task either, yet those times were the most precious. When she had collapsed after losing her parents, they had given her a reason to live again. She had urged Jiang Qian to create such meaning for himself as well, calling him Great Hero Jiang Qian. Then the memory shifted abruptly. He saw himself crying out loud, sitting before the woman and her younger brother and sister, dead, with swords embedded in their bodies. He had wanted to live with her. She had become the reason for life to one who had known only killing. His sword had risen again for vengeance. His drifting life had no home. He had wondered where the purpose of his life truly lay. Snapping back to reality, he lowered his head after a few moments and began to cry, whispering that the purpose had already been there. The path of carnage he had walked alone for 15 years. Though his blade had grown dull and countless wounds had carved into his body, in the end, he had given everything to complete his vengeance. At last, gazing upon the rising sun, he laid down the sword in his hand. Here lay the demonic god, Jiang Qian. Everything went dark. Then suddenly, a loud voice echoed within. "What are you barging in here for? Do you think I'd sell my martial arts for a handful of coins?" Jiang Qian thought to himself that it was so noisy. He opened his eyes and added that he must have come to hell after all. Before him stood a woman and a young man, with martial warriors behind them. The woman spoke, saying that because the young man's brother had suffered an unfortunate accident and could not inherit the martial legacy, they now wanted her son to succeed the Namha family's secret martial arts. Jiang Qian was confused by the situation and wondered if this was not hell after all. His attention was caught when the boy beside him shouted that it was absolutely not acceptable. His elder brother was alive and well, so how could the family martial arts flow into the mother's line? The girl beside him added that the boy was not even blood-related from the mother's side in the first place. Even if the brother could not inherit the arts, their grandfather's legacy belonged to the Manhwa family. At that sight, Jiang Qian's eyes widened. The children resembled the younger siblings of the woman he had loved in the past. He thought to himself in disbelief, asking who they were. The young man in front then grinned and stepped forward, saying that this would not end easily and that he would make them a proposal. Jiang Qian turned toward the man and muttered in confusion, asking what proposal he meant. The young man extended his hand and declared that he had heard the 2 brats were so poor they could barely eat. He would wager money. Hua Mujin would wager his clan's entire martial legacy. They would fight, and the winner would take it all. He asked what they thought of that. The boy beside Jiang Qian stammered in shock, reminding them that his brother could not even begin training due to his madness. The girl added that they would not fall for such an obvious trick. Then suddenly, Jiang Qian spoke aloud, clicking his tongue and calling their chatter noisy. He turned and asked who the hell this Hua Mujin was anyway. Both children beside him fell silent at his statement. Jiang Qian then introduced himself, declaring, "I am the demonic god, Jiang Qian." The man standing in front of him asked in confusion, "What? Who did you say you are?" Jiangqian responded calmly and stated his name, explaining that people once called him the demonic god. The young man scoffed at the title, finding it dull and overused, and remarked that he might as well claim to be the king of the underworld. This arrogant youth was revealed to be Jiang Dobo, the second son of the Jianghua Merchant Guild. The boy standing beside Jiangqian muttered that of all times, it had to happen now, while the little girl at his side groaned in frustration. A woman then stepped forward and declared that his madness worsened by the day. She clicked her tongue while idly tapping her fan, and claimed that with such a family heir, the fate of the Yonghua clan was already sealed. She insisted she said this only out of blood ties, and advised they take it kindly. It was implied that her warning carried benefits for them as well. This woman was Bu Chuyan, the master of the Jianghua Merchant Guild. She smacked her fan against her palm and announced there was nothing more to discuss, stating that silence would be taken as agreement. Turning away, she declared that on the 5th day of the next month, the matter would be settled. Her son, Jiang Dobo, turned his head back toward Jiangqian and added smoothly, "We will meet at the Flying Shadow Pavilion, a promise made between martial artists. If you break it, you know what will happen, do you not, demonic god Jiangqian?" With that, they departed. The little girl beside him watched them go and complained that they had decided everything on their own. She asked in a trembling voice what he planned to do, insisting that he had never properly swung a sword. Jiangqian lowered his gaze to them and muttered in confusion, wondering aloud if he truly had never swung one. He attempted to circulate his qi, finding nothing, and laughed bitterly at the thought that he could still muster strength. A sudden realization cut his words short, and he froze. He shouted in disbelief when he found that not a shred of internal energy remained. He bent down in frustration and complained that the frail bones of this body felt like they could not even support a weapon. The sheer weakness of his current state left him appalled. Suddenly, the little girl screamed for him to stop. He paused and stared at her. Tears welled at her eyes as she begged him to regain his senses, insisting that even in madness, no one could remain calm after hearing such provocations unless they were a fool or an idiot. The boy beside her frowned sharply and reprimanded her, demanding she apologize immediately for insulting her elder brother. She shook her head and cried harder, refusing, and then she shouted that their parents were dead because of him. The words stunned Jiangqian. The girl fled, tearing herself away, while the boy remained. He explained tiredly that their brother might not remember, as incidents like this happened often. He asked for understanding. Jiangqian murmured in response, trying to comprehend, and the boy excused himself politely before departing as well. Left alone in the courtyard, Jiangqian stared blankly ahead. Even the children treated him as if he were insane. Nothing about the situation made sense. Wandering the estate in silence, he reviewed the events in his mind. He recalled beheading the Namgung clan head with certainty, and the moment his own heart had been pierced. The suffocating pain remained vivid in his memories. He remembered fulfilling vengeance for Yanhua and her siblings, and the peace he believed should have accompanied his final breath. Yet when he stumbled upon a mirror, he found a completely different face staring back. His knees weakened, and he clutched his head in agony. Nothing about this situation aligned with logic. If that was true, then who were those children who resembled Seok and Yang-ah? Madness was the label given to him now, but to him it sounded like nonsense. A man suddenly rushed toward him, shouting urgently for the young master. When Jiangqian stood, the man scolded him for wandering outside in such a frail condition, and insisted that he had been worried. Jiangqian questioned who he was, and noted that the man clearly knew him. Confusion clouded the man's face until understanding dawned. He grabbed Jiangqian's arm and sighed, realizing the madness had struck again. He offered to explain. He introduced himself as Masok, a retainer of the Yonghua clan, and stated that once, due to exceptional talent and wisdom, countless righteous sects had sought to recruit Jiangqian. At the age of 23, he had been known as Hua Mujin, the clan's heir. Masok sighed wearily and confessed that this explanation marked the 6,205th time he had repeated it. Jiangqian shoved Masok's hand away and feigned boredom. He commented sarcastically that if he had been so great, he wondered why his dantian had become like this. Madness had become the reputation attached to him, and everyone treated him accordingly. Masok hesitated before revealing that 17 years earlier, something had happened. His words transitioned into the memory of a duel between two children. It took place on an open field while the clan elders were away. Two young boys bowed to one another and declared a match without internal energy for fairness. The boys were 6-year-old Hua Mujin and 9-year-old Jiang Dobo. Hua Mujin had challenged Dobo sincerely. Dobo nodded and repeated the terms of fairness. They began to fight recklessly. Masok continued narrating that although unclear who first proposed it, the two young masters engaged in a duel unattended. Young Mujin dodged and muttered that Dobo deflected every blow, impressed by his speed. Dobo paused mid-fight and echoed the praise, remarking on Mujin's talents. Before Mujin could respond, Dobo used internal energy and slammed a strike straight into him with a wild grin, calling him a fool. The blow launched Mujin through the air. He crashed violently, blood spilling from his nose. Dazed, he asked why Dobo used internal energy despite their agreement, and why he knew the Seven Wounds fist. Dobo shrugged and explained smugly that assassinations and experimentation came naturally. He boasted that he had already tested the technique on another disciple, who now hovered near death. With calculated cruelty, he launched another strike. Masak finished recounting the event. Jianghu, now occupying Hua Mujin's body, concluded quietly that this must be why everyone treated him as a lunatic. The after effects of the Seven Wounds fist left long-lasting damage. He remembered what had happened earlier with Jiang Dobo, and found the scenario enraging. To cripple someone, turn them into a madman, and then shamelessly challenge them afterward was unforgivable. He asked Masak how the offender had been dealt with. Masak explained that Hua Mujin's father, the former clan head, oversaw the matter. Jiang Dobo, being both his nephew and heir of one of the 10 greatest merchant guilds in the Central Plains, escaped punishment with only a severe scolding. Jiang Qian smirked bitterly and muttered that such a pathetic family allowed such leniency. He asked about his parents. Masak lowered his head and led him to the ancestral hall. There, in front of the altar, he explained that Hua Mujin's madness worsened over time, forcing his father into debt to seek treatment. 9 years ago, his mother's illness worsened and she died. 3 years later, burdened by impossible debt and despair, his father passed as well. Masak recalled the night of the ancestral ceremony and the whispers that followed through the hall. The close aides of the clan had called him a child who devoured his parents, blamed him for torment, and predicted the clan's end. Masak continued, explaining that what remained of the clan were the debts, 2 loyal retainers, and barely a dozen warriors. Lastly, he mentioned the 2 younger siblings who survived, Hua Dojin and Hua Soyan. Jiang Qian remembered Soyan's earlier anger, and admitted internally that a family ruined by illness justified her emotional outburst. Later that night in Hua Mujin's room, he pored over books. From them, he learned that after the battle with the 9 great sects, demonic god Jiang Qian had indeed died, and 30 years had passed. The world felt too real for this to be a dream. He concluded he had taken over the body of the young Hua clan's heir. He studied hand-drawn pictures and letters left by his siblings wishing him recovery. Their kindness mirrored children he once knew. He quietly realized that he would need to live as Hua Mujin now, and that, perhaps, he should help the children who suffered unjustly. The greatest obstacle was the Jianghua Merchant Guild, the group responsible for crippling him and ruining the clan. He noted that the duel with Jiang Dobo was scheduled for the 5th day of the next month, and that before then he had to secure discipleship. He lamented that he would have to start martial cultivation from the very beginning. As he sat quietly, he remembered the first time he learned martial arts in his previous life. Even breathing had been difficult. Slowly, he began practicing a breathing technique, and found that this body did not require the usual process for sensing qi. Simply closing his eyes allowed energy to flow. Qi gathered rapidly at his dantian, becoming fierce and overwhelming. The room glowed brighter and brighter until a deafening boom echoed across the estate. Servants rushed into his chamber and found him unconscious on the floor. One of them shouted in panic and examined him, mistaken at first that he had died. Checking again, he found his pulse stronger than ever, and cursed under his breath that the young master had somehow become healthier. Suddenly, Hua Mujin's hand snapped upward and grabbed the man's finger. He groaned awake and muttered in irritation that merely forming a dantian caused unbearable pain. The man asked in confusion what he meant. Hua Mujin demanded to know what sort of body he possessed, and whether it was some form of special constitution. The man casually admitted he had heard it referred to as the Heavenly Martial Constitution by a wandering Shaolin elder. Jiang Qian paused internally. The Heavenly Martial Constitution. The man chuckled and said it was the body blessed by heaven to walk the righteous path. Anger flickered in Hua Mujin's voice, but before he could retort, he coughed blood violently. He realized instantly that his constitution was wholly incompatible with demonic cultivation. If one with this body cultivated demonic arts, the pain would be unbearable and death could follow. He recalled other rare physiques: heavenly killing, heavenly flame, heavenly longevity. Masak knelt beside him and fanned him desperately, begging him to stay conscious. Jiang Qian cursed inwardly, frustrated by fate itself. The duel was next month, and his condition was dire. Through clenched teeth, he asked aloud who the old men standing nearby were. Masak identified them as Chief Steward Do Baek Shin and Elder Zhou Huanbong. Jiang Qian narrowed his eyes at them, noting their cold expressions as they whispered privately that his condition worsened daily and that perhaps it was time to prepare their hearts. He reached toward Elder Joe with trembling fingers, thoughts burning with rage, but another surge of blood burst from his lips. Masak shouted his name fearfully and begged him not to die like this. Jiang Qian's thoughts roared defiantly in the silence that followed.
I will not die, damn it.
A few days later, at the Yomwa clan estate, heavy rain poured as Masak's voice echoed down the hall. He shouted that the young master had been lying unconscious for 3 whole days. Masak followed Hua Mujin as the latter walked toward the wall, still yelling in concern, asking if he was really all right. Hua Mujin continued walking and thought to himself that lying out cold for 3 full days was absurd. He cursed his damned body, fearing he would die before even reaching the duel. He paused briefly, his body and face wrapped tightly in bandages, and told Masak to quiet down, as his shouting was making him look bad. More importantly, he said, if he was going to duel, he would need a sword. As thunder crashed in the courtyard, Hua Mujin turned to Masak, pointed at him, and ordered him to go fetch a few swords right away. Masak responded hesitantly, reminding him that they were at a point where they should be worried about their next meal. Where would they even get the money to buy a sword? Hua Mujin, still pointing, demanded to know if there was truly no money left in the entire household. Masak explained that they were already borrowing from the loan syndicate, and because of the syndicate's outrageous interest rates, their debts had ballooned to enormous levels. Hua Mujin fell silent as another peal of thunder rolled overhead. He lifted his head and reflected inwardly that this was truly the state of a fallen family. It seemed they needed to solve their money problems first. Leaning closer to Masak, he placed his elbow on his shoulder and smirked, saying that if it was just more debt, what did it matter if they added a little more? Masak exclaimed in panic, asking if he was seriously planning to borrow again. Hua Mujin dismissed his complaints and instructed him to write a letter to the 2 elders, stating that he was going for a walk. Later, Elder Do Baekshun read the letter and reacted angrily, demanding whether young Master Hua had really gone to the loan syndicate again. Elder Zhou Huanbong, standing beside him, remarked that it shouldn't be a big deal. Surely the syndicate would just turn him away. Do Baekshun disagreed. The real problem, he said, was that if Hua Mujin carelessly provoked the loan syndicate, the minor lawless factions might get involved. Elsewhere, outside the loan syndicate building, Hua Mujin and Masak stood before the tall guard stationed at the entrance. Hua Mujin smirked and called out to the man, telling him to inform his leader that Hua Mujin of the Yomwa clan wished to see him. The guard, Kang Noho, looked down at them and replied dismissively that if they had come to gamble, they should play quietly and leave without making pointless noise. Hua Mujin looked up and retorted that if Kang Noho couldn't relay the message, he should call someone who could. Kang Noho raised his voice and called him a punk. Beside him, Masak nervously interjected multiple times, stammering that their young master was just a bit unwell, and begging the guard not to take offense. Hua Mujin, still glaring at Kang Noho, asked what he was looking at. Suddenly the sound of a tossed coin cut through the tension. In an instant, another man appeared between Hua Mujin and Kang Noho, and asked what was going on. Hua Mujin instinctively stepped back. Kang Noho addressed the newcomer as brother, and explained that this man wanted to meet the leader. Hua Mujin asked if the newcomer was the one in charge. The man flicked another coin with his fingers, and asked why Hua Mujin wanted to see the leader. Hua Mujin replied instantly that he wanted to borrow more money. The man caught the coin mid-air, looked directly at Hua Mujin, and declared, "So you're a customer." This man was Ma Zhengbo, the loan syndicate's deputy leader. He added that if that was the case, there was no need to see the leader at all, then opened the door and invited them inside. Later, they arrived in an underground chamber beneath the building, walking along a wooden hanging bridge inside a cavern. Masak, walking beside Hua Mujin, whispered urgently that they should turn back. He had a terrible feeling about this. Hua Mujin dismissed him, saying they had come all this way and questioning his sudden fear. As they entered a small opening in the cave, Masak whispered more desperately that a few days earlier, an old woman at the market tea house had told him she saw 2 loan syndicate assassins fighting a single man, and in the blink of an eye, the man's chest was sliced open. He added that those assassins were said to be incredibly skilled martial artists who had mastered the twin ruinous force, moon-slaying heaven technique. Hua Mujin turned his head and asked what that technique even was. Masak repeated the name in a hushed tone. Hua Mujin simply asked what he expected him to do about it. Their conversation was abruptly cut off by the sound of another coin toss echoing through the cave. Ahead of them, Ma Jungbo, who had been leading the way, laughed and remarked that the servant was quicker on the uptake, but it was already too late to turn back. In an instant, the syndicate members behind Hua Mujin and Masak drew their swords. Ma Jungbo caught the coin mid-air and gave a single command, "Begin." Hua Mujin asked if this had been Ma Jungbo's intention all along. Ma Jungbo turned his head with a grin and explained that one could not simply assassinate the eldest son of the Yomhwa clan in broad daylight at a crowded entrance. He accused Hua Mujin of shamelessness for not even being able to pay the principal, let alone interest, and declared he would not allow him to bleed the syndicate dry the way his parents had. Beside Hua Mujin, Masak collapsed to his knees, bowing repeatedly and begging them to spare the young master's life. Hua Mujin corrected Ma Jungbo coldly, saying he never had parents. For a moment, silence fell over the cavern. Hua Mujin then thought to himself that he had momentarily mistaken Ma Jungbo's words for something from his past life. A syndicate member behind them announced he would begin. Ma Jungbo gave permission, instructing them only to rough Hua Mujin up a little. The syndicate members shouted in unison and obeyed. Instantly, one of them grabbed Hua Mujin, lifted him high into the air, and began spinning him around while shouting that the arrogant brat would die. Mid-spin, Hua Mujin shifted his body, seized the man's arm, and snapped it with a sharp twist. The man screamed in agony as he crashed to the ground, shouting that the rat-like punk had surprisingly nimble footwork. After landing, Hua Mujin glanced at his attacker and remarked that for such a big man, he was surprisingly soft. He looked at his own hands and reflected that with his current rotten body, this indirect method worked better than a direct fight. Behind them, Ma Jungbo tossed another coin and impatiently asked what they were all doing, telling them to finish it quickly. Another syndicate member lunged forward with his sword, slashing repeatedly at Hua Mujin, who dodged each strike with swift precision. Frustrated, the attacker called him a slippery eel. Hua Mujin continued evading, and thought that since raw strength was out of the question, using movement arts was the optimal approach. At that moment, now, he charged straight forward and headbutted the man square in the face. Blood gushed from the man's nose as he stumbled backward. Before Hua Mujin could recover, another syndicate member was already beside him, swinging his blade. Hua Mujin flipped backward, landed on his hands, twisted his hips, and unleashed a spinning kick that sent the attacker flying. The man crashed into a third syndicate member behind him, and both tumbled to the ground in a heap. Nearby, Masak cried out, asking if the young master was all right. Hua Mujin landed smoothly and replied that he was perfectly fine. Couldn't Masak see that? Masak stared in disbelief and asked where he had learned such martial arts. Hua Mujin clarified that it wasn't martial arts. It was just what he had naturally picked up from living on the rough streets. Masak frowned in confusion and asked when the young master had ever lived on the streets. Their exchange was cut short once more as Ma Jungbo prepared to toss another coin. He acknowledged Hua Mujin's skill and challenged him to dodge this as well. He flicked the coin with tremendous force, aiming directly at Hua Mujin. Hua Mujin barely dodged it in time, though a few strands of his hair were sheared off. He thought in astonishment, was that really just a coin? He whirled around to face Ma Jungbo just as the deputy leader ordered the remaining syndicate members to leave, declaring he would handle things himself. Hua Mujin stated firmly that he only wanted to speak with their leader, and asked if that was truly so difficult. Ma Jungbo drew his sword and replied that the leader was not someone one could meet so casually, then ordered Hua Mujin to leave. In an instant, Ma Jungbo lunged forward with his blade. Hua Mujin, however, pulled out a pair of chopsticks and blocked the strike. Ma Jungbo exclaimed in shock, "Chopsticks?" Hua Mujin shoved the sword aside with the utensil, and thought to himself that he had brought them as a sword substitute, but they were proving surprisingly useful. He began parrying Ma Jungbo's sword strikes with the chopsticks, carefully observing the deputy leader's attack patterns. He recalled the rumors that Ma Jungbo used martial arts no one had ever heard of. Then he spotted an opening. An opening, he thought. In a flash, he stabbed Ma Jungbo's sword hand with a chopstick. Ma Jungbo groaned in pain as Hua Mujin yanked it free. Ma Jungbo reeled internally. This man had not only blocked a sword with chopsticks, but exploited the moment to strike back. Enraged, Ma Jungbo swung his blade horizontally and shouted, "You punk!" Hua Mujin leaned his head back just in time to evade the slash. Ma Jungbo clicked his tongue in frustration, muttering that Hua Mujin moved like a rat. Hua Mujin retorted that if Ma Jungbo underestimated chopsticks, he would soon be shitting blood. He began spinning multiple chopsticks in both hands, imbuing them with his own chi, and hurled them at Ma Zhengbo. Everyone struck true. Ma Zhengbo clenched his jaw and groaned in pain, thinking in disbelief. Hadn't they said Hua Mujin could no longer use internal energy? How had he reached such a level? He swung his sword wildly, but Hua Mujin dodged each strike with ease. Ma Zhengbo's mind raced. Was this truly the Hua Mujin of the Yomhua clan he thought he knew? Hua Mujin found another opening and stabbed Ma Zhengbo again with a chopstick. He spoke aloud, saying he had heard his family was drowning in debt, so he had come to see what kind of people they were dealing with. But to find them extorting with such pathetic skill was disappointing. He struck again, this time piercing Ma Zhengbo's elbow with another precise stab. After a few more exchanges, Ma Zhengbo leaped high into the air, declaring he would show Hua Mujin a taste of the martial arts he so clearly looked down upon. Hua Mujin called up from below, confused. When had he ever looked down on them? Ma Zhengbo screamed in fury as his sword became enveloped in swirling qi. He roared that he was done with games and unleashed his secret technique, Twin Ruinous Force, Moon-Slaying Heaven. He descended with his blade aimed straight at Hua Mujin. Below, Hua Mujin stood perfectly still, looked up, and said calmly, "The ones playing games are you guys." As Ma Zhengbo struck, Hua Mujin sidestepped effortlessly. Ma Zhengbo's mind reeled. Had he really dodged it? On the side, Hua Mujin clenched his fist and began launching rapid hand strikes. Ma Zhengbo muttered to himself in terror. What on earth was this man? Had he been hiding this level of prowess all along? Hua Mujin delivered a powerful punch straight into Ma Zhengbo's gut. Ma Zhengbo curled over in agony, blood spilling from his mouth as he gasped. You punk. How do you plan to handle the consequences later? Suddenly, the familiar sound of a coin toss echoed through the cave, followed immediately by Hua Mujin's voice. I didn't come here to listen to threats. You know, he said, saying what I want to hear will help you live longer. He caught the coin midair, turned to Ma Zhengbo with a chilling grin, and repeated his original request. I need to borrow some more money, okay? Later, on the upper floor of the Loan Syndicate building, Hua Mujin sat among the usurers, taking a hit from a wooden pipe filled with weed. He lifted his head and exhaled the smoke, thinking to himself that it had been so long since he had this much fun. Without warning, Masok, who sat beside him, snatched the wooden pipe from Hua Mujin's hand and smashed it onto the table, exclaiming that such a thing was bad for his body. Hua Mujin glanced at the scattered weed and remarked that it was such a waste. Sitting across from him, Ma Zhengbo spoke aloud while the other syndicate members, those who had just been beaten in the cave, knelt on the floor with their heads bowed. Ma Zhengbo stammered and asked what Hua Mujin was curious about. Hua Mujin began to speak, questioning why men like them, who hated losing even a single coin, would support a clan without any collateral. He suspected there was malicious intent behind their actions. Ma Zhengbo lowered his head and insisted that Hua Mujin had it wrong, asking what malicious intent could possibly exist. Hua Mujin raised an eyebrow and said he could hear the gears turning in Ma Zhengbo's head from across the room. He then picked up a cup containing dice and began shaking it. With a cold tone, he warned Ma Zhengbo to think carefully. After about 30 of those dice went down his throat, he would not be able to speak even if he wanted to. After a few moments of silence, Ma Zhengbo finally confessed that they had acted at the behest of the Jianghu Merchant Guild. Hua Mujin nodded and said he had suspected those rat bastards. He then demanded to know what kind of deal they had made. Ma Zhengbo hesitated, stammering for words. Hua Mujin leaned forward and then poured the dice onto the table. In a chilling voice, he reminded Ma Zhengbo that he was neither an enlightened Taoist nor a noble warrior. If he was going to be faithful to someone, it should be to his own subordinates. Even if his body was chopped to pieces and the building burned to the ground that very day, the Jianghu Merchant Guild would not even bat an eye. Ma Zhengbo closed his eyes, paused for a moment, and finally spoke. He revealed there had been a contract. The Jianghu Merchant Guild had instructed them to lend the Yonghua clan as much money as they wanted, at the highest possible interest rate. They were told to make the clan suffer as though they had fallen into the swamp of King Yama's debt. In return, once the Yonghua clan inevitably collapsed, the guild promised them a satisfying reward along with the clan's land. Hua Mujin, reading the contract in his hand, remarked dryly that so they had been holding the clan's land as collateral after all. He then asked how much 300 yang of gold, the amount he was borrowing that day, would become in a year. Ma Zhengbo replied that, according to the contract, it would amount to approximately 5,000 yang of gold. Hua Mujin chuckled and called them a bunch of clowns. He declared it was time to move on to something else, dropped the contract onto the table, and fixed his gaze on Ma Zhengbo as he asked where the minor lawless faction was. Ma Zhengbo explained that they were one of the members of the Four Heavens Alliance, a union of Sapa sects, and that the minor lawless faction had only recently joined the coalition. Hua Mujin mused aloud that the Four Heavens Alliance was truly a dirty bunch. Beside him, Masok leaned closer and whispered in his ear, asking when Hua Mujin had ever met them to be spouting such nonsense again. Hua Mujin dismissed the question, saying it was a pain to explain, but then grew impatient and wondered aloud why the man sent to fetch the money was taking so long. Ma Zhengbo nervously urged him to wait just a moment. At that instant, a man burst through the door carrying a small chest. He placed it on the table and shouted that he had brought 300 yang of gold. Hua Mujin's eyes brightened immediately. He opened the chest, inspected the gold, and declared with satisfaction that it was good. More than enough. He stood up with a smirk and announced it was time to go. Masok, still seated, looked up at him and asked if he was really borrowing it. Hua Mujin told him to just take it without another word. As they exited the building, the rain continued to pour heavily. Outside the loan syndicate, Hua Mujin turned to Ma Zhengbo and held up a single gold coin. He instructed him to make sure it was properly recorded in the ledger that day. Once his business with the Jianghu Merchant Guild, their big client, was finished, he would return to pay off every single debt in full. He also warned them to stop extorting money from common folk. If they crossed the line, they would be seriously fucked. With that, he crushed the gold coin in his fist. Ma Zhengbo responded nervously, saying he would keep that in mind. As they walked away, Ma Zhengbo sighed deeply and thought to himself that he would soon see who got screwed over first. That mad young master of the Yonghua clan. Sometime later, the rain subsided. Hua Mujin and Masok returned to the Yonghua clan estate. Outside the ancestral hall, they were greeted by the elders, including Do Bexin, who cried out in alarm upon seeing the blood on Hua Mujin's clothes. Hua Mujin instantly assured him it was not his blood. Do Bexin demanded to know what had happened at the loan syndicate. Hua Mujin replied casually that he had simply gone to borrow some money. He reminded them they had said their living situation was difficult, and that the warriors of the Yonghua clan needed to be fed well, otherwise the rest of their people might run away. Elder Bexin stammered, asking if he had stolen the money, since there was no way the loan syndicate would lend to them. Hua Mujin said he had explicitly told them to record it properly in their ledger before leaving. He then placed a hand on Elder Do Bexin's shoulder as he stepped forward, and told him to focus only on feeding and clothing his younger siblings. As he walked away, he added cheerfully, "Well then, keep up the hard work." Inside the ancestral hall, Masok, who had been carrying the heavy chest of gold, suddenly collapsed under its weight. Do Bexin turned to Zhou Wanbong beside him and murmured in disbelief, asking if such madness could truly exist in this world. Zhou Wanbong watched Hua Mujin walk away in the distance and only clicked his tongue in response. Sometime later, Hua Mujin lit the candles on the altars dedicated to his deceased parents. He paused and spoke aloud, admitting he had never known his parents and was unsure what to say. He assured them that the financial issues were now more or less resolved, so they need not worry. From now on, he would take good care of his siblings and the household members. He asked them to rest in peace. Unseen in the corner of the ancestral hall, his younger siblings, Hua Dojin and Hua Soyon, listened quietly as he spoke to the altar. He continued, saying that in a few days, he would duel a man named Chiang Dobo, with a clan's secret manual on the line. With a smirk, he added that they should not worry. He would snap those bastards' necks. Silence filled the ancestral hall. The night ended, and morning came. Later that morning, 3 clan warriors carried large wooden cases out from outside Hua Mujin's quarters. As they dropped the 3 heavy cases to the ground, one of them exclaimed in exhaustion, asking what Hua Mujin had made them do. Masok, standing nearby, thanked them for their work. One warrior stretched his aching back and complained that it was so heavy he thought his spine would break. Another added that at least they had finally moved everything, and suggested they go have a drink and rest. A few seconds later, Hua Mujin opened the door, his face lit with excitement, and yelled out, "You're here?" He immediately began inspecting the cases. Each was labeled by weight. The first weighed 30 kilograms, the second 48 kilograms, and the last 66 kilograms. After checking the packages, he declared with satisfaction that they were all there, just right. He knelt down and opened one of the cases. Inside lay a massive sword. Masok knelt beside him and asked what he intended to do with such weapons, noting how much the warriors had struggled to carry them. Hua Mujin reached for the sword and replied, "What else would you do with a sword?" He gripped the hilt firmly and added, "You swing it." He thought to himself that he would start with the lightest one, the 30-kilogram sword. But the moment he tried to lift it, the blade crashed back to the ground. Masok looked at him skeptically and asked if he really intended to swing something so heavy. Hua Mujin fell silent, still gripping the sword on the ground. He reflected inwardly that he had expected this, but he had not imagined he could not even lift the 30-kilogram blade. He cursed his rotten body. Taking a deep breath, he tried again, telling himself he could not give up like this. After a tremendous effort, he managed to raise the sword, though his entire body trembled violently from the strain. He muttered that he could somehow lift it with both hands. He turned his eyes toward Masak, and ordered him to stop staring and do as he had been told. A few moments later, he dropped the sword and began dragging it inside his quarters. He instructed Masak that from now on, his meals should include meat-side dishes. Masak remained silent, watching Wamujin struggle with the enormous weapon, and quietly muttered that he was worried. Inside the room, Wamujin tied the sword to his left hand with a strip of cloth. Lifting it high with both hands, he thought to himself that only half a month remained until the duel. His current body possessed a heavenly martial constitution, which was completely incompatible with the demonic arts his master had taught him. Therefore, his only remaining option was the sword style passed down from his master's close friend, the 9 swords of Dugu. In an instant, he swung the massive blade inside the room, then paused in a sword stance. Closing his eyes, he reaffirmed to himself that this was now the only way for him to survive. Elsewhere, at the Jianghu Merchant Guild, Jianghu played a hagum. Upon hearing a report, he remarked that it was impressive. Wamujin had wiped out the lone syndicate. The man before him bowed and confirmed that, according to the carrier pigeon, the syndicate would be unable to move for about half a month. Jianghu mused aloud that Wamujin did not even have a dantian, so how did he possess such power? He grinned widely and added with a chuckle that class was permanent. Then, for their great young master Wa, he should prepare a little gift. He snapped the string of his hagum with his bow, and thought to himself that he was truly looking forward to the day of the duel. He wanted to see Wamujin reveal all of his hidden facets. A few days passed as Wamujin continued training his martial arts in the courtyard. He leaped high into the air and landed firmly on both feet, then reflected inwardly that this was the heavenly martial body. If it was truly a body granted by the heavens, it should at least withstand this much. Later, inside a spare room, he had set up multiple wooden traps across the room for his practice. Before beginning again, he thought to himself that Masak had already prepared everything he had asked for. He declared mentally that it began now. He performed a martial art technique. Solitary 9 swords, first form, declaration form. As he moved, he recited to himself, "I carry my sword and step forward at any time. Not even Mount Tai dares block my path." He followed immediately with the next technique, Form 2, breaking form. Again, he affirmed inwardly, "No matter what weapon comes at me, I will shatter them all." After executing the movement, a sharp pain suddenly flared in his dantian. He groaned aloud and thought that he was already reaching his limits from just this much, but he had to endure. He kicked a ball that ricocheted violently through the room. With his eyes closed, he dodged its trajectory as it hurtled straight toward him, then executed another technique, Form 3, sky-cleaving form. He cleanly sliced the ball in half before it could strike him and declared, "Even if the enemy's energy shakes the heavens, it will split before this sword." He paused for a moment. Then a burst of pain made him cry out, "Ugh, my back!" After a few seconds, he pulled a rope that released a trap from the ceiling. Multiple bamboo poles fell directly before him. He assumed a stance, observed their descent, and performed the next technique, Form 4, void-cleaving form. He spoke inwardly, "No martial art can stand before this edge. All complicated techniques fall to natural counterplay. Thus, the simplest sword can divide them." He swung his sword with such force that the bamboo poles flew across the hall and slammed into the wall at insane speed. But when he glanced at the wall, he realized he had missed the rope he had been aiming for and muttered in frustration, "Ugh, I didn't land a single hit?" As the remaining bamboo struck the wall, it accidentally hit the rope, severing it and triggering another trap. Heavy wooden logs began plummeting from the ceiling toward him. At the sight, he instantly assumed a stance and unleashed the next technique, Form 5, army slaughtering form. He thought to himself, "Even if a horde of enemies swarms me, they will kneel before this sword. An ant swarm can never surpass an elephant. Before true strength, numbers mean nothing." He sliced the falling logs into numerous pieces before they could land. As he caught his breath, a single fragment he had missed struck him squarely on the head. He clenched his teeth and shouted, "This is such bullshit! Next!" He then approached a cluster of bamboo poles with candles burning inside them, positioned in the corner, and began his next technique, Form 6, 1/part still water. He swung his sword violently and declared, "Even a floating leaf on water will be split in two by this blade." After finishing the technique, he looked around and muttered in disbelief, "This is all that's deactivated? Next is outside." He went outside and approached a stone statue, then performed his next technique, Form 7, 1 twin earths. He said to himself, "The sword opens the earth beneath. If it can cut the ground, then size no longer matters." After completing the movement, he noticed the statue remained completely unscathed and asked aloud, "Why is he still fine?" Sometime later, he performed the follow-up technique, Form 8, Heaven Sundering Form. He proclaimed inwardly, "Even the sky will be split by this blade. Is there anything left in the world I cannot cleave?" Immediately after finishing that form, he flowed seamlessly into the final one, Form 9, Self-Cleaving Form. He declared, "At last, I have cut both myself and my sword. I have no more reason to wield a sword." Once the technique concluded, he dropped his weapon and collapsed onto the ground. Closing his eyes, he murmured, "So in the end, it's just mimicry, huh?" Suddenly, a flash of memory surged through his mind, a conversation with his old master from his past life. In the memory, his master performed the final form of the technique and asked, "This is the final form, self-cleaving form. Did you memorize it?" Jianghu, still a child, sat on the ground looking up at his master and replied that he had memorized it, but questioned whether such an unworthy sword style deserved to be called a true sword art. He mocked the explanations as unbearably cringy, saying that cutting the earth, the sky, one's own sword, and even oneself sounded like something a child made up to seem cool. His master scoffed, lowered his head, and placed his left hand over his face. He admitted he wouldn't deny that, but asked whether his close friend's sword legacy should really end like this. He explained that he himself could not carry it on, so he wanted Jianghu to take it up instead. He added that his friend had been the only swordsman who could stand toe-to-toe with him. Jianghu, surprised, asked if that was possible without inner power. His master replied that his friend had likely used moving internal skill. He had strictly insisted the art be passed only to someone outside any established sect, because those within sects could never fully learn it. Jianghu chuckled and called moving internal skill a trash-tier method. His master flicked him hard on the forehead for disrespecting his friend and shouted, "I said that's how it is, so shut up already." Jianghu responded with a sigh. Fine, okay." His master continued explaining, "If one swung this sword style 1,000 times, the body would begin to change. At 100,000 swings, one would begin to emit a sword aura. And at 1,000,000 swings, few would match them under heaven." That was what his friend had claimed. Jianghu calculated aloud that even if one practiced 1,000 times a day, full mastery would take about 3 years, and asked if his master's friend had truly been as strong as him. His master replied that he couldn't be certain, but if they had fought to the end, one of them would definitely have died. Jianghu leaned back on the ground, gazing up at the night sky, and mused that he was now curious what kind of man that swordsman had been. The memory cut off abruptly when Masok found Mujin lying on the ground fast asleep. He slapped Mujin repeatedly across the face to wake him and shouted, calling him young master. After several slaps, Mujin finally woke with a startled plea to wait. Masok stopped and asked, worried, whether he was all right, saying he had been worried because the young master had not gotten up. Mujin, still lying on the ground, warned him that if he hit him once more, he would kill him. As Mujin sat up, he reflected irritably to himself that he had fainted after just one sword form, and that he was far from accomplishing 1,000 swings a day. He accepted that the road ahead was still long. Masok placed a tray of food before him and urged him to eat even though it was late. Mujin pointed at the dish and asked if it was pork. Masok replied that the young master had asked yesterday for meat-side dishes, and that it had been so long since they had enjoyed meat that they should savor it. Mujin said that starting tomorrow, he wanted beef because beef builds muscle better. If money were an issue, he told Masok to use the funds from the loan syndicate, and to tell the butler not to worry because he would borrow more later. He added that until he fought Cheongdobo, he would be eating 3 meat meals a day. While Mujin ate, Masok said he was amazed that the young master had suddenly mastered sword techniques, even though he had not known any martial arts before. He mentioned how Mujin used a chopstick to beat up the guards of the loan syndicate, and now this crazy sword style. Mujin said that he had already told the children, so telling Masok did not matter. He began to say he was not really the eldest son, Hua Mujin, and that his real identity was the divine demon, but Masok interrupted him sharply. He warned that if Mujin began spouting nonsense again, he would leave. He admitted that he only worried about one thing, that someday, just like before, Mujin would lose his memory again, change into someone else, and disappear without a word. He asked if the young master was thinking of abandoning the Yomhua clan. After finishing his food, Mujin set down his chopsticks and answered that he would never abandon the clan, not until Yomhua became the strongest martial family in Sichuan. Besides that goal, he did not really have anything else to do. Masok was taken aback and repeated the strongest martial family in Sichuan with disbelief. Mujin confirmed it with confidence. Masok scoffed at the ridiculousness of it. Without warning, Mujin flicked his forehead, then crossed his arms while sitting on the ground and told him that if he was done yapping, then he should get out. Masok grumbled and stood, saying fine as he left the room. Mujin closed his eyes and wondered to himself if becoming the strongest in Sichuan would be enough motivation for Hua Mujin as well. Time passed. Inside one of the rooms of the Yomhua clan estate, The two elders were present. Du Beiaxin poured tea into a cup, while Zhou Huanbong stood by the window, gazing outside as he spoke. In 10 days, it'll be the duel between Cheong Dobo and young Master Hua, Zhou Huanbong said. Du Beiaxin, seated at the table, responded by murmuring Cheong Dobo's name. He lifted the teacup and added gravely that the man would surely try to end the young master's life, and after that, he would come for the young emperor's inheritance. Zhou Huanbong then exclaimed, "What if we just run away before that happens?" Du Beiaxin instantly turned his head toward him and asked sharply, "What are you saying?" Zhou Huanbong pressed on, "Think carefully. We can't let the last two remaining be harmed as well." A few days passed as Mujin continued his relentless training. After one exhausting session, he gasped for breath and cursed in frustration. He looked down at his arm while panting and thought to himself that simply swinging a sword every day had begun to build actual muscle. He noted with satisfaction that he had finally reached the point where he could swing a 66-kilogram iron sword with one hand. Clicking his tongue, he muttered that there was only 1 week left until the martial arts competition. A familiar voice echoed in the distance, calling out to him. When he turned toward the sound, he saw his younger siblings, Hua Dojin and Hua Soyan, standing by the door. He approached them and asked what brought them there, then warned that it was dangerous, telling them to go play somewhere else. Dojin admitted that they were worried and explained that they had been watching him for days. They thought he was pushing himself too hard. Soyan added nervously that she wondered if he was doing all of this because of what they had said before. She confessed she had only been angry and had not meant it. Mujin sighed heavily at their concern. He looked at them and thought silently that the two of them reminded him of his former comrades. Then he lightly patted both of their heads and told them not to worry about him. Suddenly, Dojin began to imitate one of Mujin's sword postures with his arm and claimed excitedly that the posture had been amazing. He asked if that was how it was done and declared that Mujin looked just like a martial artist of the Jianghu. Soyan disagreed, arguing that the arms had been straighter than that. While watching them, Mujin smiled and thought it was cute that they were copying him. It reminded him of the days when he trained alongside his master. That nostalgic memory surfaced vividly. He remembered young Jiang Qian being lectured by his master, who instructed him to exhale when swinging the sword for as long as possible. The voice warned him not to rush. When returning to the original position, he was to inhale slowly and shortly. The master demanded that he understand clearly. When the memory faded, Mujin realized what he had almost forgotten. He thought to himself that the most important aspect of the Peerless Nine Swords was the breathing technique. He had neglected the lesson his master taught him. With a confident smile directed at his siblings, he told them out loud not to worry. He declared that he would win no matter what. Then he pushed both of them gently out of the training area and told them to go back to their rooms. As the door closed, the siblings laughed together. Soyan asked if everything would be fine, and Dojin answered with uncertainty that it probably would. Time passed as heavy rain poured down over the Yomhua clan estate. Mujin continued his training indoors. He performed another technique while thinking through the instructions in detail. He reminded himself to exhale while swinging, to hold it, to avoid rushing, and to inhale slowly and shortly when returning to position. He noted that the fifth form, Army Slayer, required using all collected internal energy at once. He finished the technique cleanly, grinned, and declared triumphantly that he had done it. Instantly, he shifted stance and performed the next sequence, breathing deeply. He reflected on movement arts, calling them a chi art that built internal energy through physical motion rather than meditation. Because movement arts required movement instead of stillness, they were looked down upon as low-grade martial arts with low expectations. The most important principle of movement arts, he reminded himself, was stable breathing. One must breathe with the flow of the sword to stabilize the body. He thought back to how difficult it once was to swing. But through training like this, the breathing stabilized everything. He reflected that after repeating this training continuously, even the dantian that had been in disarray for years was slowly beginning to come together. Eventually, the sun began to set. In the kitchen, Masak prepared food for Mujin. A voice called from behind him, revealing Zhou Huanbong. He asked if young Master Hua was still training. Masak hurried to finish preparing the meal, covered it, and said that the young master had become a completely different person. He explained that before, Mujin used to fall over constantly, but now he did not. Masak suspected that the treatment given by the Wudang physician might have been effective. Zhou Huanbong paused and placed his hand on his forehead while thinking quietly to himself. He doubted that even a Wudang physician could improve someone so dramatically with a single session. He then spoke aloud, instructing Masak to report to him if any problem arose, but before he could finish his sentence, Masak ran off excitedly with the covered meal and shouted his acknowledgement. Zhou Huanbong simply clicked his tongue at the situation. Moments later, Masak rushed toward the training yard and called out that dinner was ready. However, when he arrived and saw the scene before him, he froze in shock. The outer wall had been crushed into rubble. He stuttered in disbelief as he asked what he was looking at. Mujin replied calmly that the area was too small. When Masak asked what he meant, Mujin exhaled heavily, sweat pouring down his face, and clarified that the place was too small for training. He declared that from that point on he would use the official training hall instead. The next day, Mujin, accompanied by Masak, arrived at the Yeomhwa clan's training hall. Other warriors were already present and glared at him with disgust. Mujin noticed the stares and said out loud, "There are already people here." Masak tried to address the warriors, saying, Misters, the young master wishes to use the great training hall." He stopped speaking as the warriors' gazes turned toward him. Mujin stabbed his large sword into the ground and gestured for them to leave, saying, "You heard him, yeah? I'm gonna need to borrow the training hall. I want to train on my own. I need space. There is another one over there, so use that one." The warriors gritted their teeth, thinking, what the hell is this walking dead man saying? Just because you have a sword doesn't mean that you're a martial artist. He's never even shed blood with that sword of his. Mujin scoffed at them and said, "Goodness, your eyes are very challenging." One of the warriors began to respond, "Even if you're the young master." But his words were cut off as a man stepped in and extended his left hand sideways. The speaking warrior instantly noticed the man and said, "Sir." The man raised his hand and commanded, "Let's leave. The young master wishes to train martial arts." The man was Chil Boyin, the Yeomhwa clan Rain Sword Squad leader. As the warriors left, one of them clicked his tongue loudly and whispered as he passed Mujin, "Shh, it seems like he's lost his mind again." Mujin exhaled deeply and spoke before they could fully depart. "Hey, slowpoke, stop right there." Chil Boyin gritted his teeth at Mujin's taunt and turned his head, saying, "Ha?" Mujin lifted his head, turned toward them, and with a grin, said, "If you have complaints, say them to my face. Talking shit behind someone's back is a very pussy thing to do." Chil Boyin replied, "So what?" Mujin then challenged him, "What do you think? We're swordsmen." Mujin pointed his large sword straight at Chil Boyin's face and declared, "Let's fight." Chil Boyin scoffed and responded with a smirk, "Young Master Hua, even if the world is ending, there is no one who would unsheath their sword to fight someone who will eventually be the patriarch." Mujin then countered, "You know what people say. A dog that bites does not bark, whereas a dog that barks is afraid." He placed his large sword on his shoulder, grinned widely, and added, "If you're not gonna man up, then don't bark from the start. Just live like the cowardly dog you are." At Mujin's insult, Chil Boyin's body began to tremble with anger. He clenched his sword, unsheathed it, and began swinging it around before pointing it at Mujin, saying, "Don't regret it." Mujin took a sword stance with his large sword and smirked. "Well, I'm not one to regret things in life." Masak and the nearby warriors tensed as they watched the impending duel. Both combatants assumed their stances as silence filled the training yard. When Chil Boyin dropped his sheath, he instantly attacked. Mujin planted his large sword into the ground and jumped high to dodge the strike. As he leaped into the air, he appeared above Chil Boyin and grabbed his head from above. The warriors nearby were shocked by Mujin's actions, thinking to themselves that he was fighting a duel without his sword and wondering what kind of move this was. Chil Boyin immediately shifted his sword upward toward Mujin. Mujin twisted his body sideways to evade the attack. On the sidelines, Masak closed his eyes in terror and shouted, "Young Master Hua!" The battle continued with Chil Boyin relentlessly attacking Mujin from below, while Mujin kept dodging. Chil Boyin screamed in frustration, demanding that Mujin stop evading his attacks and fight him properly with a sword like a man. Still suspended midair, Mujin responded flatly, "You're right." He descended beside his giant sword and grasped its hilt. At the front, Chil Boyin began spinning his sword with his right hand and declared that it had been 25 years since he joined the Yeomhwa clan. He blamed Mujin for the clan's current state and mocked his sudden desire to learn martial arts. Gritting his teeth, Chil Boyin lunged forward with all his might, shouting that Mujin should know his place. Mujin prepared for the incoming assault, swinging his large sword. As Chil Boyin's attack neared, Mujin sharpened his gaze and executed his technique. "Solitary 9 swords, second form, breaking form," he announced. When their weapons clashed, Chil Boyin flew backward from the force of Mujin's strike. His eyes widened in shock as he thought to himself that even his internal energy was shaken by this technique. Mujin instantly followed up his attack, clenching his fist as he declared that everything Chil Boyin had said was true. But, he added, things would be different from now on. He punched Chil Boyin directly in the face, causing blood to gush from his nose and mouth. As Chil Boyin flew backward from the impact, he thought in disbelief about how Mujin's once clouded gaze had completely transformed. Those were now the eyes of a true warrior, burning with resolve. Chil Boyin crashed to the ground with a loud thud that echoed throughout the training yard. Everyone present, the warriors and Masak alike, stood completely shocked, thinking to themselves that young Master Hua had actually won. After a few moments, the warriors rushed toward the fallen Shielboin, shouting, "Brother, are you all right? Brother, brother!" Mujin planted his sword firmly in the ground and exclaimed, "Now, nobody has any complaints, right?" One warrior shouted toward Mujin, calling him a coward. When Mujin turned his head to ask how so, the warrior began to explain that Mujin had known Shielboin could not face him with his true strength. His words were cut off as Shielboin sat up and shouted for silence. Blood poured down from his nose and mouth as he admitted defeat. He stood and bowed respectfully, saying he had learned from this experience. Mujin simply responded, "Good, now step down." Shielboin shouted, "Loyalty!" and waved his hand toward the warriors, ordering everyone to stop interfering and move to the training ground next door. As Mujin watched them leave, he instructed Masak to go as well. As the warriors walked toward the adjacent training ground, one complained that even if Mujin was the young master, this was going too far. He asked why Shielboin had held back. Shielboin, walking in front, responded that he had not been holding back, he had intended to half-kill Mujin. The warrior behind him expressed disbelief, to which Shielboin retorted that he did not look like someone who spoke empty words. When the warrior stammered a hesitant reply, Shielboin concluded that regardless of what had happened, it seemed their mad young master had gained a heavenly opportunity. Masak, listening from the rear of the group, thought to himself about this heavenly opportunity. He wondered when Mujin would have had such a chance. He stopped walking, looked up at the sky, and added to himself that since the young master had changed, he supposed it was fine. As time passed, it was now the night before the duel with the Jianghu clan. Inside the ancestral hall, Elder Zhou Huanbong stood by the door staring at the night sky, while Du Beixin paid his respects at the altar. Du Beixin mentioned tomorrow's duel with the Jianghu Merchant Guild, and asked how many years it had been since they joined the clan. Zhou Huanbong, still gazing at the sky, responded that it had been about 37 years. Du Beixin remarked that it was quite a long time. He recalled the early days of the Yonghua clan, when Lord Yumjie in his youth had been truly unmatched. Even the haughty Tang clan had been forced to acknowledge his martial prowess. Du Beixin reminded Zhou Huanbong that they had both sworn to devote their lives, drawn by Lord Yumjie's radiance. Zhou Huanbong countered that Du Beixin was now breaking that vow. Du Beixin insisted this was not betrayal, they must carry on Lord Yumjie's bloodline and martial legacy somehow. Zhou Huanbong turned around and approached Du Beixin at the altar, saying he knew and that Du Beixin did not need to convince him. He noted they had spent 17 years tending to young Master Hua's madness, and 17 years protecting the withering Yonghua clan alongside him. Even if they met Lord Yumjie in the afterlife, he would not blame them. More importantly, Zhou Huanbong asked if the preparations were complete. Du Beixin sighed deeply and replied there was not much to prepare, just a little silver to secure a new place to settle. Beyond that, only a handful of warriors and 4 clan tokens remained. After a pause, he instructed Zhou Huanbong to go first. When Zhou Huanbong questioned this, Du Beixin explained that despite everything, Mujin was still of Lord Yumjie's bloodline. Someone must be there to tend to his body. He added that a martial master of the Kongdong sect, hired by the Jianghu Merchant Guild, would serve as witness to tomorrow's duel. Zhou Huanbong scoffed that they bragged about the witness as if theft was something to show off. Du Beixin explained that this demonstrated how serious they were. They meant to make it official. He cursed the Jianghu Merchant Guild as evil bastards who would burn the place until not even roots remained. He instructed Zhou Huanbong to go to the promised location first and wait for him, adding that the 2 young ones would be very shocked by all this. The next morning, as Mujin ate breakfast, he commented that lately the meat felt tougher and asked if it was just him. Masak, drinking tea across from him, replied that it was not just Mujin. The cheaper cuts from cattle were always the toughest. Mujin flicked Masak's forehead and asked if he was already out of money. Masak responded while drinking tea that he would not know since the chief steward barely gave them any. When Mujin asked if Masak was sulking, he denied sulking over something so petty. Mujin questioned why Masak had said something that would earn him a beating. After finishing his meal, Mujin dropped his chopsticks on the table, stood up, adjusted his clothes, and asked Masak how he looked today. Masak stared at him blankly and honestly replied that he had looked better with the bandages on. Mujin flicked his forehead again, turned around, and said, "Let's go." Masak obediently followed with a quiet affirmation. Mujin grabbed his giant sword as they exited the room. Outside the courtyard, Elder Du Baixin appeared and asked if Mujin was really going. Mujin narrowed his eyes and responded that he hoped Du Baixin had not come to spout the same nonsense about running away. Du Baixin assured him that was not the case. Mujin asked if that was right, then told Du Baixin to wait there. He would return after beating those thieves to a pulp. Du Baixin lowered his head in a bow and declared he was coming with Mujin. Mujin stared at him in silence, then closed his eyes and thought to himself that this old man worried too much. He was the one who would smash them anyway. Perhaps old folks simply worried more. After a few moments, Mujin opened the main gate, inhaled and exhaled deeply, and began walking forward saying, "Let's go." Later at the Jianghu clan estate, the town bustled with excitement over the impending duel. A man shouted through the crowded streets, announcing a duel between the Jianghu merchant group and the Jianghu clan, urging those wishing to place bets to hurry. The crowd began chattering amongst themselves, inquiring about the odds. The bookmaker consulted his ledger and declared the odds at best 1-4. After careful consideration, a bettor deemed this a reasonable payout. He added that any martial artist would be unwise to bet on a merchant group over a martial clan. He then wagered 2 silver nyang on the Jianghu clan. Suddenly, a man beside the bettor pointed into the distance and shouted, "Oh, it is the young master of the Jianghu clan." As Mujin arrived at the Jianghu clan estate, all eyes turned toward him. Unfazed by the stares, Mujin continued eating bing tang hulu. Witnessing this, the man who had just bet on the Jianghu clan abruptly requested to cancel his 2 nyang wager. Mujin took another bite of the sweet treat and spoke to Elder Do Baixin beside him, stating, "See, I told you I would not be late." Elder Do Baixin replied that eating so much before a duel seemed excessive. A woman approached them at the entrance, holding an open umbrella. She greeted Mujin, remarking it had been a while. This woman was none other than Bu Choyan. Out of consideration for their blood ties, she asked once more whether he truly intended to proceed with the duel. Nearby onlookers began whispering amongst themselves, expressing disbelief that the Jianghu side had requested the duel first. They muttered that the Jianghu clan, lacking proper talent, had recklessly initiated this challenge, and judging by the severity of Mujin's madness, the rumors appeared true. Mujin finished the last piece of bing tang hulu and thought to himself that they were making it sound as though his clan had demanded the duel. He resolved to repay them for that. He pointed the stick from the treat directly at Bu Choyan and responded firmly with a grin, stating they could not allow the Jianghu merchant group to seize the secret manual of the Jianghu clan, leaving them no choice but to fight. The crowd gasped upon hearing this, murmuring in confusion about whether a renowned house like Jianghu would covet a martial clan's secret art. Bu Choyan narrowed her eyes and replied that she wondered how long he would maintain such composure. Later, at the arena, the duel prepared to commence. A loud voice echoed throughout the space, announcing that Han Yigang of the Kongdong sect would serve as witness. Han Yigang then introduced the combatants: Jianghu Bo, the next successor of the Jianghu merchant group, and Hua Mujin, the young master of the Jianghu clan. He declared that under the Kongdong sect's authority, they must fight fairly. The crowd erupted in cheers. On the stage, Jianghu Bo spread his arms toward Mujin and smirked, remarking that he saw Mujin had received the goods sent from their merchant group. When Mujin appeared confused, Jianghu Bo clarified that the martial uniform Mujin wore was the Jianghu clan's attire, personally sent by him to commemorate the great Hua Mujin's return. Mujin drew his giant sword from his back, lifted it high as the bindings fell away, and rested the shaft on his shoulder. He smirked and replied that once the duel concluded, all remaining goods would need to be returned as well. The crowd murmured upon seeing Mujin's weapon, with one spectator questioning whether the Jianghu clan truly fought with a sword. Another wondered if swordsmanship could even be performed with such a massive blade. A third pointed out that the Flame Emperor had been known for bare-handed martial arts. From the top viewing area, Elder Do Baixin turned to Masak and inquired whether the young master had said anything unusual that day. Masak hesitated before admitting that when he had jokingly suggested fleeing that morning, Mujin had flared up in anger. Elder Do Baixin sighed, remarking that Masak had also suggested fleeing to him. Masak clenched his fist, insisting he personally believed without doubt that their young master would win, though he then doubted himself, wondering if running might have been better. He added that perhaps things would turn out differently since the young master had changed, though he questioned whether such a transformation could occur so suddenly. Elder Do Baixin closed his eyes, worrying silently whether the young master's madness had spread to Masak as well. The official handling the gong then bellowed for both sides to confirm their readiness. Hua Mujin and Jianghu Bo assumed their fighting stances. The official declared that if they were prepared, the duel would begin. He struck the gong with his mallet, its resonant rings signaling the start. Instantly, Mujin lunged forward and slashed with his giant sword. Jianghu observed the attack and blocked it with his own blade. The crowd's jaws dropped at the initial exchange, murmuring in disbelief that the young master Hua, who was said to be severely afflicted by madness and untrained in martial arts, exhibited such strength. On stage, Jianghu gritted his teeth, clicked his tongue, and shouted that even so, such skill belonged only to a mere pup. He surged forward, swinging his sword, while Mujin countered with his massive weapon. A fierce battle ensued as both combatants repeatedly swung their blades at each other, the clashing steel echoing throughout the arena. After a violent exchange, Jianghu managed to graze Mujin's face with his sword. Blood dripped down Mujin's cheek as he leaned back to evade the strike. He began moving around the stage, but Jianghu pursued relentlessly. Their swords met again with a loud clang. Jianghu grinned inches from Mujin's face as they locked blades, continuing their rapid exchange of attacks. From the top viewing area, Bu Choyan watched the fight intently. She thought to herself that this was surprising. Hua Mujin was lasting far longer than she had anticipated. Still, compared to the martial arts Jianghu had trained in until now, his skill remained insignificant. On stage, Mujin swung his giant sword and nearly struck Jianghu. Mujin switched his grip to follow up instantly, but Jianghu leaped high to dodge. Mujin looked up just in time to dodge as Jianghu descended with insane speed to attack. Once separated, they stared at each other. Jianghu thought that this time he would leave Hua Mujin crippled. He raised his sword, aiming it at Mujin, and declared that breaking a man's will was what he did best. He rushed forward immediately. Mujin blocked the attack, and Jianghu followed with another slash. Mujin bent backward to evade. Meanwhile, from the top viewing area, Elder Do Baixin and Masak could scarcely believe what they witnessed. Elder Do Baixin cleared his throat and remarked that he had expected young Master Hua to be defeated immediately, yet he was holding out quite well. Masak exclaimed that though he did not know the details, perhaps Mujin had not yet revealed his full strength. Elder Do Baixin turned to him, asking what he meant suddenly. Masak explained that he had secretly watched Mujin train in solitude, suggesting something enormous and even more powerful might soon be revealed. On stage, the fierce exchange halted once more as the combatants separated. Mujin, breathing heavily and drenched in sweat, thought to himself that from what he could tell, his current skills were about on par with his opponents. He wondered if the short amount of time he had trained had been insufficient. He concluded it did not matter, for throughout his past, no matter how strong his opponents had been, he had always killed them in the end. He resolved to kill this bastard without fail. He lifted his giant sword high as a burst of red chi flared around the blade. Jianghu likewise raised his sword, blue chi erupting along its length. They stared violently at each other. After a tense pause, both rushed forward simultaneously. Elsewhere, Elder Zhou Huangbong studied the instructions Elder Do had given him. The directions read, "From the place with a shabby hut, head east for 5 kilometers, then turn toward the side upon encountering a hawthorn tree, and proceed another 3 kilometers. As a gust of wind passed by, Elder Zhou sighed deeply upon arriving at his final destination. He remarked that he had somehow finally arrived, and fortunately, the two children had fallen asleep, making it easy to bring them along. He recalled an earlier conversation at dawn. Before leaving the Yomhua clan estate, he had asked Elder Do if he truly would not accompany him. Elder Do had responded that since Hua Mujin was still that person's blood relative, someone must at least gather his remains. He stated that he would personally oversee the young Master Hua's last journey. Elder Zhou had then turned away and replied that they would go ahead first and meet at the promised location. Returning to the present moment, Elder Zhou sighed again deeply as he looked up at the sky. He admitted to himself that he was not sure if what they were doing was the right thing. Back at the Chonghua clan estate, the fierce battle between Mujin and Chengdobo continued. As their blades clashed, Mujin thought to himself that Chengdobo was not bad for his age, but in the end, he was still just at the level of a greenhorn. The crowd watched the battle in awe, murmuring amongst themselves about why the two combatants appeared evenly matched, or why young Master Hua even seemed to have the upper hand. They recalled hearing that the second son of the Chonghua Merchant Guild was an outer sect disciple of the Kongdong sect, but he did not seem particularly impressive after all. Hearing the chatter from the crowd, Chengdobo gritted his teeth and shouted in fury as he swung his sword with powerful force toward Mujin. From the top viewing area, Elder Do and Masak gasped at the incoming attack, shouting warnings for young Master Hua to dodge. On the other side, Bu Choyan simply grinned at the sight. Mujin then began to perform a technique. Solitary 9 swords, first form, total annihilation form, he declared. As he struck, Chengdobo managed to block the attack. The crowd was shocked, exclaiming that it had been blocked. Mujin smirked as their swords clashed. Chengdobo groaned as he slowly realized Mujin was overpowering him. After a few moments, Mujin finally shoved Chengdobo away. Chengdobo slid backward as they stared at each other. Mujin grinned while Chengdobo clenched his jaw and shouted, mad bastard." Chengdobo then assumed another stance, as chi surged around him. From the top viewing area, Elder Do observed the fight, and thought to himself that young Master Cheng was gathering all his inner energy. The same thought occurred to Han Yigang and Bu Choyan, who believed this must surely be his final strike. As Chung Dobo gathered his inner energy, Mujin suddenly jumped forward, shouting with a smirk, "Too slow! Even your gathering of inner energy is slow." Chung Dobo's eyes widened at the unexpected attack. Mujin then performed another technique, Solitary 9 Swords, second form, breaking form. As Mujin struck, Chung Dobo tried to block with his sword, but his blade was instantly flung back with a loud clang. Mujin immediately swung his sword again. Chung Dobo barely blocked the attack, clenching his teeth with a furious expression as he thought to himself that he was so helpless against these attacks. He questioned whether he was truly losing to this energy core-less bastard. As they clashed swords once more, Chung Dobo's blade began to crack. Moments later, his sword broke in half. In an instant, Mujin swung his sword and cut down Chung Dobo's arm. Chung Dobo's eyes widened in shock as he muttered, "What the?" Before he could finish his thought, Mujin lifted his leg and delivered a powerful kick to Chung Dobo's gut. The force violently threw Chung Dobo backward as he screamed in pain. He dropped to the ground and continued sliding until he stopped just at the edge of the stage. After his body came to rest, his severed hand also dropped to the ground. From the top viewing area, his mother Bu Choyan screamed loudly, calling out his name. On the other side, Elder Do and Masak began breathing heavily, shocked at the sight. On the stage, Mujin turned around and walked toward the severed hand. The crowd started chattering, questioning if young Master Hua had truly won. Mujin picked up the severed hand, lifted it up, and pointed it toward Bu Choyan. He shouted that he would take this arm as payment for the 17 years of grudge. Bu Choyan responded with a shaky voice and grief-stricken expression, asking what he had said. Mujin replied that since it was the Changhua Merchant Guild, perhaps they would find a way to reattach the arm. Suddenly, someone jumped down from the top viewing area. It was Han Yigang, who landed beside Chung Dobo's fallen body. He immediately placed his hand on Dobo's body to examine him. After a few moments, Bu Choyan also hurriedly rushed toward Dobo on the stage. Han Yigang spoke after checking Dobo's condition, stating that his dantian had been shattered. He stood up and looked at Mujin, asking if it had really been necessary to go this far. Mujin scoffed in response, questioning what Han Yigang meant. Han Yigang explained that there had been a clear gap in skill, and the match had been over long ago. Mujin replied that if they were going to speak like that, he had plenty to say too. He glared toward Bu Choyan and spoke about whether it had been necessary to use the 7 wounds fist strike on the head of a 5-year-old child who knew no martial arts. He declared this was nothing more than settling a grudge from 17 years ago, for daring to provoke the Yonhua clan. They would now have to pay the price and should be prepared. After his statement, Mujin began to walk away. Bu Choyan instantly fell to her knees, clenching her fist as she cried out loudly. As she wept, she thought to herself that she would never forget this matter involving Hua Mujin. The crowd remained stunned in awe at the result of the fight. As Mujin walked away, they began to roar loudly in cheers, chattering excitedly amongst themselves about how he had crushed an outer sect disciple of the Kongdong sect in just a few moves. They remarked on the sword art they had never seen before, declaring that a new martial master had been born. As Mujin stepped off the stage, Elder Do and Masak hurriedly rushed toward him, calling his name. Mujin continued walking and simply instructed them to head back. Elder Do, still unable to believe the result, responded with a hesitant affirmation. As he watched Mujin walk away, he thought to himself that young Master Hua's back had never seemed so broad before. His thoughts were interrupted when Mujin turned his head back toward him and called out, "Chief Steward Do." When Elder Do responded, Mujin continued, "About that." Elder Do, confused, stammered a question about what that referred to. He worried to himself that perhaps Mujin had already noticed their plan to run away. Mujin cleared his throat with a smirk and spoke about the gold he had entrusted to Elder Do, asking if he had already spent it all. Elder Do laughed nervously, assuring him that of course not, there was still a little left. Mujin walked away and mentioned that he would have to stop by the loan syndicate again soon because of money issues. He added that these days, the meat was rather tough. He paused for a moment and continued, one more thing. About Elder Joe and the other warriors. I do not particularly care if they choose to leave the clan, but if they ever try to split me apart from my 2 younger siblings." He turned his head toward Elder Do and glared at him with full killing intent. "They will have to wager their lives." Later that day, elsewhere, Elder Joe sat on a rock holding a piece of paper while Hua Soyan climbed on him, shouting angrily about how this could happen on the very day of her brother's duel. Hua Dojin, standing to the side, expressed his disappointment, stating that this time, he could not forgive Elder Joe. Elder Joe struggled with the children, explaining that he needed to read the message that had come with the messenger pigeon. After a few moments of reading the letter, he muttered, "Oh dear. We are screwed." The letter stated that young Master Hua had won the duel, their escape plan had been discovered, and they should return immediately. As they prepared to depart, Mujin paused and turned to Elder Do. He mentioned that since they were discussing finances, it was time for what he called a debt party. Elder Do appeared confused by the term, prompting Mujin to clarify that he meant dealing with the loan syndicate, also known as the Bangho sect. Mujin stated firmly that it was time he addressed them and assured Elder Do he would handle everything personally, suggesting the elder could rest instead. Elder Do responded nervously, his thoughts betraying his concern. Though the martial arts duel had proven the young master was completely different from before, he still worried deeply. Mujin dismissed his anxiety, calling him an overprotective old man. Elder Do insisted that whatever Mujin did, he must avoid entanglement with the social sect. Mujin waved off the warning impatiently, repeating that he understood. After Elder Do departed, Masak questioned whether Mujin truly intended to confront the Bangho sect directly. Mujin crossed his arms, replying that troublesome matters were best addressed immediately. He then turned to Masak and instructed him to stay close behind his big boss from now on. Masak immediately affirmed his understanding, though he seemed puzzled by the new title. Later at the Bangho sect usury business, Ma Jungbo greeted Mujin with visible apprehension upon their arrival. To himself, he reflected that he never expected to see Mujin again in this lifetime, especially after witnessing how he had crippled the vicious second son of the Jianghu merchant group. When Mujin announced he had come to repay his debts, Ma Jungbo fell silent. Mujin walked past him, commenting on the quiet atmosphere and asking if their business had failed. Ma Jungbo gritted his teeth before explaining that most gamblers in Xicheng had attended Mujin's duel, leaving their establishment empty. Mujin remarked knowingly that everyone must have placed bets on his match. Instantly, Ma Jungbo and nearby Bangho sect members bowed deeply, apologizing profusely for any disrespect. Mujin suggested they had likely set favorable odds on his side and made a considerable profit from it. Still bowing, Ma Jungbo reluctantly confirmed this was true. Mujin pressed further, noting they had made good money thanks to him and questioning whether they planned to remain silent about sharing their profits. As Ma Jungbo lifted his head, he thought bitterly that Mujin was trying to squeeze them again. He quickly assured Mujin they had intended to properly express their gratitude. Satisfied, Mujin entered a nearby room and sat in a chair, stating this was exactly what he liked to hear. Ma Jungbo watched him from behind, noting silently how completely different Mujin was from before. The air around him was cold yet steady, truly the aura of a martial master filled with killing intent. Mujin then inquired about the Bangho sect leader's whereabouts. Ma Jungbo hesitated before asking why Mujin sought him. Mujin placed his hand on the table and stood abruptly, warning that he disliked repeating himself. Before he could finish his threat, the Bangho sect leader, Che Wengjiol, entered the room accompanied by another man. Mujin smirked at their appearance, particularly mocking Che Wengjiol's hairstyle and asking if he was indeed the boss. Che Wengjiol replied that his subordinates had informed him about Mujin. Mujin questioned why they made things difficult for someone merely seeking conversation, adding that Che certainly did not possess a pretty face. He then pointed at the man behind Che, asking if he was one of his lackeys. The man stepped forward, his chi visibly surrounding him thickly and consistently. He smirked and commented that Mujin had quite the mouth for a child. This man was Dongsal Hyukjo of the social sect. He continued by asking if Mujin was the one eyeing his money. As Dongsal approached, Mujin reached into his pocket while thinking to himself that this man was from the social sect. He then bluntly told Dongsal that adults were talking and questioned if he had a death wish. Dongsal chuckled before suddenly lunging toward Mujin, shouting for him to try killing him. From behind, Masak called out in alarm to the young master. Mujin pulled a chopstick from his pocket, spun it around his hand, and declared that regardless of sect affiliation, anyone standing in his way would get a hole put through them. He threw the chopstick with precision. Dongsal managed to block the attack with his bare left hand, but the chopstick pierced through his palm. Staggering back, Dongsal realized to his surprise that Mujin was no ordinary young man. Flexing his right hand, he commented that having his hand pierced by chopsticks was interesting, calling Mujin an intriguing little bastard. Mujin retorted that he felt nothing hearing such words from a wrinkled old man. Dongsal lunged forward again, shouting not to get cocky. Mujin likewise surged forward, but in an instant, he disappeared from sight. Reappearing above Dongsal while still mid-air, Mujin questioned where Dongsal thought he was looking. Dongsal quickly turned to attack with his bare hands, but Mujin dodged effortlessly. Seeing Mujin grin down at him, Dongsal clenched his jaw in disbelief that a mere youth could evade his attacks so easily. Mujin then spoke in a chilling tone, suggesting they open one more hole. Before Dongsal could react, Mujin's hand was already aimed at his right eye with the chopstick. In one motion, he stabbed Dongsal's eye. Both Masak and Ma Jungbo froze in shock at the sight. Mujin stood before the kneeling Dongsal, who groaned in pain while clutching his bloody eye socket. Mujin grinned and asked if the air was flowing nicely through the new opening. Dongsal screamed curses, warning that Mujin had attacked the social sect and they would come for him, threatening his family and subordinates as well. Before he could finish, Mujin kicked his face, driving the embedded chopstick deeper. Looking down at him, Mujin challenged the social sect to come if they dared, adding that in the meantime, Dongsal would die there. Dongsal suddenly screamed in desperation, begging for his life. He offered everything he owned, his wealth, his concubines, anything to spare him. Mujin questioned his sudden desire to live. He placed his foot down and withdrew the chopstick from Dongsal's eye, stating he had no need for concubines but found the mentioned wealth interesting. Dongsal screamed that all his wealth was in Dichang and he would bring everything back immediately. Mujin approved of this attitude but warned sinisterly that if Dongsal failed to return, he would be breathing through the holes in his face instead. Dongsal staggered back, shouting he would return right away before fleeing the premises. With the room now silent, Mujin turned his chilling gaze toward Che Wengjiol. He suggested they continue settling the debt. Che Wengjiol's body trembled before Mujin, and instantly, he bowed deeply, pressing his forehead to the ground while begging for mercy. Mujin approached him, questioning if he too wished to plead. Che Wengjiol screamed promises to give everything he owned. Mujin looked down at him while holding another chopstick, stating coldly that Che was speaking nonsense. His property already belonged to Mujin. Che Wengjiol responded with a shaky voice, confused about what Mujin meant. Mujin explained that the 7,000 gold nyang in profits Che had extracted from commoners, plus the price of all the lives he had ruined by manipulating martial clans, would equal all his assets. Che Wengjiol paused, looking up at Mujin before beginning to offer everything, including. Before he could finish, Mujin threw the chopstick directly into Che Wengjiol's forehead, instantly killing him. Mujin remarked coldly that Che clearly did not understand plain speech, questioning why he kept offering what was already his. As Che Wengjiol's body fell to the ground, Ma Zhengbo and other Bangho sect members froze in shocked horror, their eyes wide and mouths agape. When Mujin turned toward them, he demanded to know who was next in command. Without hesitation, Ma Zhengbo stepped forward, nervously identifying himself as the vice-sect leader. Mujin expressed mild surprise at this revelation. Ma Zhengbo bowed deeply, begging for his life and swearing he would live honestly if given another chance. Mujin sat back down in a chair and granted his request. He then inquired about the dead leader's property value. Ma Zhengbo placed a paper on the table, reporting that Che's house, brothel, and cash combined totaled approximately 4,000 gold nyang. When asked about the Bangho sect's total assets, he replied that counting all establishments, it amounted to at least 10,000 gold nyang, including the 500 gold nyang tribute paid to the social sect. Mujin studied the paper thoughtfully before calculating aloud, the leader's personal wealth of 4,000 gold nyang, the businesses that should naturally return to his influence, the sect's total assets of 10,000 gold nyang, the 500 gold nyang tribute to social, plus compensation for the mental distress they had caused, totaling about 20,000 gold nyang. Ma Zhengbo muttered in disbelief about emotional damages, but Mujin insisted this sounded fair. Without hesitation, Ma Zhengbo promised to prepare the transfer documents immediately. Mujin instructed him to handle all documents in gold right there in the room. As Ma Zhengbo affirmed his compliance, the room fell silent again before Mujin's tone shifted firmly and chillingly. He looked at the remaining Bangho sect members and suggested they negotiate ransom prices for the rest of them, clarifying that while he had spared Ma Zhengbo, he had never promised to spare the others. Instantly, the remaining members began pleading for their lives. Later, at the Manhwa clan estate, Elder Do stood utterly shocked as he stared up at a mountain of wooden crates filled with gold. He exclaimed in disbelief, asking what all this was. Mujin, standing behind him, explained he had just returned from the debt party, noting each chest contained approximately 400 gold nyang. After glancing at the crates, Elder Do immediately turned to Mujin, addressing him formally. He reminded Mujin that he had previously warned who backed the Bangho sect. When Mujin recalled it was the social sect, Elder Do urgently asked if he knew who was allied with them. Mujin responded dismissively that he did not care to know. Elder Do shouted that Ju Sugang of the Crimson Sword sect was sworn brothers with Dong Sal Hyukjo and Hong Johong of the social sect. When Mujin recognized the name Dong Sal Hyukjo as the man with pitch-black fingers, Elder Do was horrified to learn Mujin had already encountered him. Mujin flatly confirmed he had stuck chopsticks in the man's eyeballs. Elder Do could only manage a stunned as, "What?" Mujin's tone turned serious as he addressed Elder Do. He explained that opponents like that might be too much for Elder Do or Elder Joe to handle, but they should not hold him to their standards. If trouble like that came looking for him, he would simply kill them all. Changing the subject, he instructed Elder Do to prepare tender beef for dinner and ensure his siblings were fed when they returned. He then headed inside. Elder Do remained stunned by Mujin's actions, watching him walk away while thinking to himself that Dong Sal Hyukjo was feared even across Sichuan, yet Mujin did not seem to think much of such a man. Recalling the incident during the duel as well, Elder Do wondered if this was truly the same young Master Hua he had once known. As night fell, in a room at the Jianghu Merchant Guild, a mysterious figure spoke to Bu Choyan, noting that planning an ambush on the Manhwa clan must mean she had been rattled by the duel's outcome. Bu Choyan, facing away from the figures, coldly reminded them they were merely hired help and questioned why they were so talkative. She reiterated her instructions, bring back only one child alive, kill the rest if desired, but that specific child must not die. One of the mysterious figures chuckled darkly, assuring her they would return before sunrise. After they departed, Bu Choyan thought to herself about Hua Mujin. She vowed silently that she would tear apart everything he held dear right before his eyes. As Elder Do continued to watch young Master Hua walk away, he reflected deeply on the clan's history. There had once been a time of glory for the Manhwa clan when a remarkable man known as the Flame Emperor drew admiration from countless martial artists who filled the training grounds merely to observe him. Even the prestigious Tang clan of Sichuan had praised both his character and strength. Within a single generation, the Manhwa clan had risen to become a martial clan that no one could ignore. Renowned martial masters dared not provoke the warriors of the Manhwa clan. There was a time when the people of Xicheng would cheer passionately whenever the clan's members walked the streets. But after the Flame Emperor's death, During the succession ceremony for the next patriarch, the incompetence of the new patriarch had been exposed to the world. The Manhwa clan gradually declined, and even their loyal followers began to turn away one after another. The image of the Flame Emperor, who once ruled the martial world, remained vivid in Elder Do's mind. To the orthodox sects, he had been a bold and magnanimous hero. To his enemies, he had been a tyrannical martial master of unparalleled skill. That man had truly been extraordinary. Elder Do wondered why the sight of the departing young Master Hua overlapped with the image of the Flame Emperor. A loud voice then echoed from outside. "Chief Steward! Chief Steward!" Elder Do instantly turned toward the gate where warriors had just entered, gasping for breath. He asked them why they were the only ones present and inquired about the whereabouts of the young master and young lady. One warrior screamed after catching his breath that assassins sent by the Jianghu merchant group had ambushed them. Elder Zhou and the warriors were fighting them as best they could, but there were too many attackers. Elder Do froze in shock after hearing this news. He thought to himself in horror that the young master and young lady were in danger. He shouted to the warriors to notify young Master Hua immediately while he would head to the location first. The warrior responded with a trembling, "Yes, sir." Elder Do then ran instantly outside to help. Elsewhere, assassins faced Elder Zhou, who was protecting the children, Hua Dojin and Hua Soyun. One of the assassins in front spoke with a chilling tone as he pointed his bloodied sword at them, saying they were the only ones left, and that he would not kill all of them. He warned them to think carefully, adding that if they struggled too much, even the children might die. Elder Zhou shouted in rage at the assassins. Suddenly an attack came from a distance toward one of the assassins. A fan hit the assassin's weapon, disarming him immediately. The fan then ricocheted from trees to trees. As Elder Zhou looked back at the direction of the fan, he saw Elder Do from behind catching the fan mid-air. Elder Do held the fan firmly and spoke with a commanding tone, instructing everyone to stand back quietly. Another assassin shouted as he laughed, calling Elder Do another arrogant bastard who should be killed. The assassins rushed forward and attacked Elder Do, who managed to block the attacks with his fan. Then one of the assassins bumped into him from the side, mocking that this was all they had sent, just a decrepit old man. Suddenly, Elder Do shifted his body and swiftly moved, managing to strike 3 assassins simultaneously while he was mid-air and upside down. From the ground, Elder Zhou shouted at him to be careful. From below Elder Do, an assassin watched him and prepared to attack with his sword. As the assassin swung his sword, Elder Do barely blocked the attack, rolling around before landing on the ground. He shouted in frustration at his situation. As soon as he landed, 2 assassins rushed toward him instantly. One of the assassins swung his sword while Elder Do struggled to block the attack with his closed fan. As the sound of steel clashing echoed through the area, the assassin attacking Elder Do shouted that they would handle that side and leave only one child alive while killing the rest. Elder Do, still struggling as he blocked the attack, shouted insults at the assassins. Then the second assassin came from the side and shouted for Elder Do to just die already. He attacked and managed to hit Elder Do, causing blood to gush from Elder Do's chest as he groaned in pain. The assassin in front of him then shouted as he followed up with another attack. The attack hit Elder Do once again on his body, making him scream in pain as more blood gushed from the new slash wound. The children watched as Elder Do fell to the ground right in front of them. One of the assassins then stepped forward and looked at the children, contemplating which of the 2 brats he should kill and which he should spare. Dojin, with his trembling body, instantly stepped forward to protect his younger sister. Behind him, Soyoung called out to her brother as her body trembled. As the assassin closed in, he lifted up his sword and prepared to swing, remarking that since Dojin had volunteered himself, he would be the one to die. But before he could swing his sword, a deafening scream rang out to the entire forest. "Stop right there!" Everyone stood frozen at the loud voice. From the distance, Mujin appeared as he ran with a furious expression, hurriedly rushing forward toward them as he pulled out his giant sword. One of the assassins noticed him and thought to himself that it was the lunatic, Hua Mujin. One of the assassins then spoke out loud as they looked at Mujin rushing forward, questioning whether killing Hua Mujin would matter. The assassin beside him responded that if he got in the way, they should kill him. As Mujin closed in on the assassin spoke confidently, declaring that Mujin would not live to see another sunrise. Mujin then swung his sword, and as their swords clashed, the assassin's blade broke into pieces that flew upwards. The assassin's arms trembled from the powerful shock. Without wasting time, Mujin raised his giant sword immediately, then swung it down, cutting the assassin in half. He then instantly jumped forward to another assassin. One of the assassins in the back shouted in disbelief at what he had witnessed. As Mujin closed in, one of the assassins shouted for everyone to attack at once and kill him. Then 4 assassins jumped forward toward Mujin. Mujin then stopped moving, gripping his sword with both hands before performing a technique called the Peerless 9 Swords 5th Form Army Slayer. Mujin swung his sword violently, cutting the assassins in half and into pieces while they were still in midair. Then one of the assassins on the ground attacked Mujin, but Mujin instantly dodged his attacks. As he looked at the assassin, in one swift move he found an opening and cut the assassin's head off cleanly. As the head and body dropped to the ground, one of the assassins in the back, witnessing Mujin's martial prowess, said in disbelief that he was a monster. In an instant, Mujin threw his giant sword toward the assassin, instantly cutting off his right arm. The assassin screamed out of pain as he fell to the ground. Mujin then approached him slowly and warned him not to move a finger if he wanted to live. Mujin then turned toward the elders and his younger siblings. As Soyeon opened her eyes, she saw her older brother and muttered his name. Dojin instantly blocked Soyeon's eyes and shouted, "Don't look!" Soyeon was confused as she responded, asking what was happening and whether brother Mujin had beaten all the bad guys. Dojin then got closer to her as he kept blocking her eyes, shouting again not to look. Mujin then approached them and asked if they were okay. Dojin looked at him and responded with his shaky voice that he was fine. Mujin noted that Dojin must have been scared. Dojin then exclaimed that he was not scared at all, declaring that he was the son of a martial clan after all. Mujin then patted Dojin's head and spoke with a warm smile, saying, "Good boy." He then turned toward Elder Joe, who was carrying the wounded Elder Do, and instructed him to take the wounded and his siblings back to the manor. Elder Joe instantly responded with a "yes, sir," and ordered everyone to the infirmary. Mujin then turned around toward the last assassins whose right arm had been cut off and remarked that he should stop groaning over his chopped arm. Mujin stated that the assassin had been sent by the Jianghu merchant group's spies and added that if he answered properly, he might let him live. The assassin on the ground shouted whether Mujin would really let him live. Mujin warned him not to make him repeat himself, reminding him that he could just wipe them all out instead. The assassin responded instantly that it was Bu Choyan, master of the Jianghu merchant group, who had hired them through the Death Forest faction. He asked again if Mujin would really let him live. Mujin then picked up his giant sword from the side and responded that if the assassin did not want to die, he should run back and tell Bu Choyan something specific. With a sinister tone he added, "Tell her the details of how Hua Mujin of the Yumhua clan massacred your entire group, and that he's going after her next." Later, Mujin walked along the streets returning to the Yumhua clan manor. The people on the streets began to stare at him, whispering to one another about the blood covering him and questioning his identity. One passerby identified him as the lunatic from the Yumhua clan, wondering if his madness had subsided. Another interjected that it appeared even worse than before. Those who witnessed him walking along the roadside, drenched head to toe in blood, could no longer laugh or look down on him with contempt. Another group of onlookers spoke among themselves, discussing how they had heard he single-handedly defeated the Bangho sect, those vicious fighters. They mentioned how he had apparently left the second son of the Jianghua merchant guild half-paralyzed. People had once called Hua Mujin the mad young master. The crowd continued their chatter with growing curiosity. Some remarked how strange it was, recalling that when he was a child, even the Shaolin sect had come looking for him, calling him a prodigy blessed by the heavens. They wondered if it could be the return of that talent. And now they called him the hidden dragon of the Shicheng. Upon arriving at the manor, Mujin opened the main door, and instantly Masuk rushed toward him with open arms, crying out, "Young master!" Mujin grabbed his face to prevent him from embracing him, while Masuk continued speaking anxiously about his relief that the young master was walking on his own, and inquired about any injuries. Mujin assured him he was fine and asked if everyone was in the medicine hall. Masuk confirmed that not a single person had escaped injury, though the second young master and Lady Soyeon were resting in their chambers to regain their strength. Mujin praised him and instructed him to prepare a bath immediately. Masuk acknowledged the order and asked Mujin to wait just a moment. As night fell, Mujin soaked silently in the bath, sighing in relief. He recalled the reactions of his younger siblings earlier, and thought to himself about how resting to regain strength was something unthinkable for children of a martial clan. He reflected that he did not want those two to witness the cruelty of the world just yet, wishing instead they could live seeing only good things. He wondered if he was protecting someone else through them. As he scooped water with his hand, he saw the reflection of the younger siblings of the girl he once loved in the past. After staring at the image for a moment, he released the water and looked toward the window, gazing at the moon. The next day at the medicine hall, Mujin spoke with Elder Joe, who sat on his bed while Mujin stood beside him. When Mujin requested the Red Flame art manual, Elder Joe was visibly startled and asked for the reason behind this request. Mujin paused briefly before narrowing his eyes and questioning if Elder Joe was worried he would relapse and tear it apart during another fit of madness. Elder Joe quickly denied this concern. Mujin pressed forward, staring down at Elder Joe as he explained that the elder could not possibly teach the clan's secret techniques in his current condition. He declared that starting the next day, he would personally train the two children. Noting Elder Joe's doubtful expression, Mujin sighed and remarked that the elder clearly doubted him. Elder Joe insisted this was not the case. Mujin reassured him that nothing would happen. After receiving the manual, Mujin turned to leave, instructing Elder Joe to rest well. Both Elder Joe and Elder Do, who had appeared behind him, bowed respectfully as Mujin departed. After Mujin left the medicine hall, Elder Joe sat back down on his bed and sighed deeply, wondering if this would truly be okay. Elder Do, standing beside the bed, advised him not to worry so much, reminding him they had witnessed the young master's overwhelming swordsmanship firsthand. He noted that thanks to that display of strength, they had received prompt medical treatment and were recovering quickly. Elder Do observed that Mujin's fits had stopped recently, and his condition was clearly improving, suggesting the Taoist treatment was finally working. Elder Joe questioned whether that treatment also strengthened martial arts abilities, stating he had never heard of such a thing. Elder Joe admitted that his sudden improvement really could not be explained otherwise unless he had encountered some fateful meeting. Elder Joe added that it must have been with a powerful martial master, as no other explanation fit. He remarked that the 17-year-long shadow cast over the Jianghu clan seemed to finally be lifting. The next day at the Jianghu clan training ground, Mujin brought his younger siblings to teach them martial arts. He began explaining that the butterfly dance was the bee buzz. Soyeon responded with confusion, stating she did not understand what that meant. Mujin cleared his throat before proudly explaining that it meant facing an opponent as if freezing their feet in place while maintaining movement as free as a butterfly's, describing it as a fundamental movement technique he had created himself based on countless real combat experiences. Both Soyeon and Dojin muttered awkwardly in response. Soyeon then honestly pointed out that Elder Joe had said Mujin barely had any real combat experience. Beside her, Dojin turned to shush her, whispering that she could not say such things aloud. Mujin coughed before shifting to practical training, instructing both children to attack him with the basic fist technique they had learned. Dojin expressed shock at the sudden transition while Soyeon responded excitedly. As both siblings rushed forward to attack, Mujin's eyes widened in disbelief at their movements. He thought to himself about their pathetic flailing, questioning whether they were truly from a martial clan. He considered that perhaps they were simply too young, but still found their lack of balance, body rotation, and basic control utterly absurd. Without warning, he shouted aloud, "Enough!" Both Dojin and Soyeon immediately stopped and looked at him. Mujin placed his hand on his head, sighing as he claimed his head suddenly hurt and suggested they stop for the day. Soyeon inquired if he was all right, noting they had not hit his head. Mujin hesitantly complimented their skills as being much more than he had expected, instructing them to strengthen their bodies before learning advanced techniques. He told them to rest and that he would see them at dinner. As his younger siblings walked away, Mujin sighed again and muttered to himself about how this would not be easy. He apologized to his master, acknowledging he must have had a hard time himself. Because of him, the clan's martial lineage had been severed, but he vowed to restore their ruined clan to its former glory and revive its martial legacy. Most importantly, he would find that bastard who bore the cursed swordless mark whom he could not defeat in his previous life. He picked up his sword, noting he could now even lift it with one hand, and began swinging his giant sword through the air, jumping high as he practiced. He muttered that he could feel the energy in the air, sensing his speed increasing with every repetition of the sword forms. A few days later, both Elder Joe and Elder Do arrived outside the main hall. Elder Joe announced his return, to which Mujin simply responded, "Good work." Masuk exclaimed indignantly at this minimal acknowledgement, reminding Mujin how much everyone had gone through protecting the second young master and Lady Soyeon. Mujin instantly retorted, asking who had authorized them to act so recklessly, warning that if he had arrived even slightly later, they would all have returned in coffins. He threatened to place them in one himself if they ever repeated such behavior. Both elders lowered their heads in apology. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the main door. "He's definitely getting better." Everyone turned their heads as the man walked forward, boasting that he had warned them only he could treat the young master, and predicting that just a few more sessions would fully cure him. This old man was Do Young-soo. Masuk stared in shock, questioning the man's identity. Mujin turned toward Do Young-soo and flatly stated, "Who are you? We don't have food for beggars. Get lost." Masuk shouted at Mujin to watch his words, explaining this was the man who had treated him. Masuk then turned to Do Young-soo and apologized profusely, explaining the young master was not yet completely recovered. Do Young-soo cleared his throat before he could speak, but without warning, Mujin kicked Masuk out of the way, commanding, "Move." His expression then shifted to a grin as he apologized for his rudeness, claiming he had not recognized the visitor. His tone changed dramatically as he glared with a chilling gaze, stating, "You must be hungry after your long journey. Please come inside first." "Sir, Taoist." Mujin recalled Masuk's words from a few days ago about the Taoist who had inherited the Taoist lineage of the Wudang sect. Masuk had explained that this Taoist was famous for a divine martial art said to cure ailments with spiritual energy, and had treated the young master. Masuk had not known much detail, but had mentioned the head steward paid quite a hefty price to bring him to the manor. Mujin grinned as he looked at Do Young-soo and thought to himself that this must be the man. He invited him to come in politely. As Mujin stepped forward toward the main door, Do Young-soo cleared his throat while Mujin passed by, responding with a formal, "Very wells." After Mujin closed the door, Elder Do walked beside Do Young-soo, but before they could proceed further, Mujin spoke about having heard that Do Young-soo had inherited the Wudang sect's Taoist lineage. Both Elder Do and Do Young-soo turned their heads toward Mujin. Do Young-soo responded nervously that this was correct, adding that while it was strange for him to say so himself, he was the only Taoist to inherit the essence of the Wudang sect's true lineage. He declared himself the Wudang White Immortal. In an instant, Mujin appeared right in front of Do Young-soo, startling him. Mujin leaned toward his face with a wide grin and wide eyes, questioning whether he truly claimed to be the Wudang White Immortal. He remarked that it was strange, as he had never heard of any successor of Wudang's Taoist lineage surviving. Do Young-soo stammered in response, insisting it was not nonsense and that he truly was. But Mujin cut him off, telling him to listen carefully and tell the truth while he still could, warning that he would not be able to turn back later. When Do Young-soo expressed confusion and asked if Mujin was doubting him, insisting he was the very one who had, he was again interrupted as Mujin grabbed his sword from his back. Mujin raised his sword high, suggesting that if Do Young-soo was truly a Taoist of the Wudang sect, dodging this sword should be a piece of cake. Do Young-soo staggered back with a shriek. As Mujin swung his sword, Do Young-soo barely dodged the strike, falling to the ground. After a few moments, Do Young-soo shouted from the ground, demanding to know what Mujin was doing and urging others to stop him. Masa quickly responded, asking why the young master was doing this and insisting the man before him really was. But Mujin abruptly silenced him, ordering him to fetch a bucket of water quickly, promising to show them something funny. When Masak hesitated with a questioning, "Pardon?" Mujin waited impatiently. After a few moments, Masak handed a bucket of water to Mujin, who poured it on Do Young-soo still lying on the ground. Do Young-soo groaned and shouted about the madness, questioning if the Manhwa clan repaid kindness by humiliating their savvy, but before he could finish, Mujin grabbed Do Young-soo's beard and pulled it out instantly. Nearby, both Elder Joe and Masak were shocked at the sight. On the ground, Do Young-soo shrieked once more, stunned by Mujin's actions. Mujin spoke loudly, noting it was a fake beard and accused him of even gluing it on carefully, calling him a filthy fraud. Later, inside the main hall, Do Young-soo sat on the floor in the middle, surrounded by Mujin, the elders, and Masak. Elder Do shouted at him, accusing him of having the guts to swindle him of all people and admitting he had actually fallen for the deception. Masak then inquired what Mujin planned to do with the fraud. Mujin stated he could not simply let him go, adding with a wide sinister grin that perhaps cutting off his limbs and turning him into a eunuch would suffice. Do Young-soo immediately began begging for his life, pleading for mercy and not to be killed. Mujin clarified he would not kill him, explaining that if he died, there would be no way to get the money back, and he would just cut off a few. Do Young-soo cut him off, shouting desperately not to harm his arms and legs and promising to return all the money he had swindled. Mujin approached him with a grin, stating that returning the money was a given, but he would also charge him for his useless limbs and manhood. Do Young-soo shouted again that he would pay any amount requested, as long as they spared those parts of his body. Mujin then turned his head toward Elder Joe, inquiring how much the fraud had scammed from him. Elder Joe reluctantly responded that it was 50 gold yang. Mujin laughed derisively, questioning if Elder Joe had truly been conned that badly and calling him too gullible. He asked what Elder Joe had been doing all these years. When Elder Joe lowered his head and explained he had heard the man was a great healer, Mujin screamed at him to stop, declaring he had heard enough and did not want to listen to any more excuses. Turning back to Do Young-soo, Mujin instructed him to start with the 50 gold yang. Do Young-soo responded that the money was not there at the moment, suggesting they go to his residence in Jianghu to retrieve it. Mujin began walking forward, noting it was 4 hours away and ordering him to lead the way. Elder Joe shouted after him, asking if they should accompany him. Mujin shouted back not to bother, questioning what they would even do with their weak bodies and whether he would need to clean up their corpses too. He ordered them to stay home and not cause trouble. As they exited the building, Mujin told Do Young-soo to move it and lead the way. Do Young-soo obediently responded, "Yes, sir." As Elder Do and Elder Joe watched them leave, Elder Do exhaled deeply, suggesting they should just trust him on this matter. Elder Joe agreed quietly, noting the young master was no longer the man he used to be. As Do Young-soo and Mujin walked on the streets, Mujin thought to himself that he should have brought a horse, wondering if the household had not a single beast left. When they reached a corner, Do Young-soo turned to Mujin and pointed out the carriage he had arrived in, inviting him to get on. Mujin scoffed at the sight, remarking that Do Young-soo must have scammed quite a lot to afford such a fine 4-horse carriage, calling it impressive. After a few moments, as Mujin hopped onto the carriage, he clicked his tongue and exhaled deeply at the lavish interior decoration. Do Young-soo explained it was lined with cotton and finished with leather, necessary for comfort as he traveled across the nation for work. As they both got inside, Mujin commented that Do Young-soo really had a strong work ethic for a crook, questioning why he did not find honest work instead if he was so professional. Do Young-soo bowed to Mujin, promising to do exactly that from now on. Mujin lay down on the comfy cushioned seat, stating he would get some sleep and instructing Do Young-soo to wake him upon arrival. Do Young-soo lowered his head respectfully, saying he understood and wished Mujin to rest well. As Mujin closed his eyes, Do Young-soo gritted his teeth and thought to himself that the young master would soon regret his actions. He then ordered the coachman to depart. With that, they traveled outside the city. After some time, they entered a forest. The carriage suddenly stopped, and Do Young-soo hopped out, his gaze turning to the far distance where a broad man was approaching. Do Young-soo confirmed his arrival and pointed at the carriage, instructing him to drag the sleeping occupant out and make an example of him. The broad man gritted his teeth as he approached the carriage, thinking to himself that this interference was happening again. He wondered why someone would obstruct the business of a Taoist trying to redeem the masses. As he entered the carriage, he stared down at the sleeping Mujin, thinking this was the price he would pay for his stupid interference. He clenched his fist, pulled it back, readying for a strike as Qi began to surround his arm, adding that Mujin should not resent them. But his eyes widened in shock after his attack. Mujin, who had been sleeping, managed to block the punch with his sword. He questioned what was happening, then glared at the broad man, asking if they had already arrived. Mujin swung his sword toward the man, who managed to block it with his arm guard. After the attack, the broad man flew a distance outside the carriage. Zhou Yongsu's eyes widened in surprise as he muttered in disbelief. The broad man spoke aloud, lifting his trembling hand that had blocked Mujin's attack. "Sichang's hidden dragon, so you really weren't all talk." As Mujin stepped down from the carriage, he responded, "Since when has Jinyang been such an isolated forest? Was I your target from the start? I thought you were just a scammer, but it seems you can scheme too." Suddenly, a surge of qi burst from Mujin's body as he added, "I was getting bored anyway. Let's see what you've got." The broad man shouted for everyone to emerge. Moments later, a second figure stepped out from the woods, scoffing that the dandy before them seemed bent on shortening his own life. Two more men followed, gripping their weapons and lining up squarely against Mujin. Together, the four constituted the Zhongshan Four Demons. Mujin surveyed them, then smirked, remarking that their appearance was exceptionally unsightly. Under his breath, he muttered a question, "Demonic energy?" Before hefting his giant sword and observing aloud that their armaments were impressively varied, he drove the blade into the earth. A shockwave erupted outward, forcing all four demons to stagger back a step. Calmly, Mujin announced that he wished to test their skill. Without warning, he lunged. The broad man's eyes widened. He barely managed to intercept the strike with his arm guard. The other three demons whipped their heads sideways in stunned disbelief. Mujin had appeared as if from thin air. As Mujin pressed his assault, raining blow after blow upon the broad man, the remaining three rushed to aid their comrade. The axe-wielder stammered in outrage that their opponent was focusing solely on one of them, while the mace-bearer urged the others to intervene at once. Grunting under the relentless barrage, the broad man struggled to hold his ground, inwardly comparing each descending strike to the crushing weight of a falling mace, so heavy it threatened to buckle his stance. When Mujin feinted a step sideways, only to rotate his wrist and redirect the attack, the broad man lost his balance mid-dodge. Mujin raised his leg and declared, "You're nothing special after all," before driving his heel squarely into the man's face. The impact sent him hurtling backward. Mujin pivoted just in time to meet the axe-wielder's charge. He ducked beneath the swing and drove his elbow deep into the man's abdomen as he turned. Simultaneously, the swordsman and mace-wielder closed in and struck in unison, but Mujin slipped between their attacks like wind through reeds. Within seconds, he found an opening and landed a precise punch against the mace-wielder's ribs, felling him instantly. Without pause, Mujin leapt toward the swordsman. Though the man blocked the initial strike, his blade soon fractured under the strain. Mujin pressed the broken weapon toward his face, then halted the motion just as steel met flesh. Instead, he delivered a sharp kick to the gut, sending the swordsman tumbling across the ground. As the four demons lay scattered and winded, Mujin looked down at them and reflected that they undoubtedly practiced demonic arts, yet such methods were exceedingly rare in the Central Plains. He lowered his sword and added, almost to himself, that he had no desire to kill juniors who wielded such forbidden techniques, but he was uncertain how to proceed. His deliberation was broken by a booming plea. "Wait!" He turned to see the broad man kneeling, admitting their defeat and begging for mercy. Nearby, Du Yongsu watched in stunned silence, thinking with mounting dread that even the feared Zhongshan Four Demons had been dismantled so effortlessly. The broad man continued, explaining that after only the first few exchanges, it had been clear they stood no chance. Mujin arched a brow and asked why they had persisted in taking hits if they knew their inferiority. Did they enjoy pain? The man fell silent. Mujin smirked and relented. He would spare them, but he would destroy their energy cores and sever their meridians. The broad man groaned, then pressed his forehead to the earth in kowtow, shouting that they had only followed orders, and pleaded that he not strip them of their martial paths. Mujin chided him for whining at his age, then demanded to know who their master was. Confused, the man stammered, and Mujin cut in, voice sharp with impatience. "What else? I'm asking who's your master." He insisted that true demonic energy was vanishingly scarce in the region, and their cultivation bore its unmistakable signature. Pressed further, the broad man revealed haltingly that their master had been alive until the year before last, and that they never learned his name. Mujin flared in disbelief. What kind of disciples failed to know their master's name? Terrified, the man explained that they had been instructed to avoid seeking out fellow disciples and to forget all ties. Mujin's irritation boiled over. If they were so inept at discernment, he snapped, they should have stayed hidden, practicing mediocre arts in obscurity, instead of turning to thievery. The broad man protested that they were no thieves. They had merely assisted their brother in his business. Mujin retorted that they must have known the man's true nature, yet still chose to aid him. The broad man countered, earnest and bewildered, that they believed they were performing a righteous act, saving lives. Was that not commendable? Mujin turned away. Enough. Go. Quit being his lackeys today. If I see you again, you'll die. All 4 demons dropped to their knees and thanked him in unison. As Mujin approached the carriage, he addressed Du Young-soo directly, stating that he must cover the ransom for the 4 men, compensate for the cost of his own life endangerment, and reimburse Mujin for the stamina and mental damage incurred during the encounter. Du Young-soo muttered under his breath, "What mental damage? Is there such a thing?" Some time later, as the carriage rolled on, the broad man watched from afar and recalled his master's final counsel, that they were poor thinkers with gullible ears, that they must choose their companions with extreme care, and that if ever they met someone both strong and righteous, they ought to follow and serve that person without hesitation. He smiled faintly, their thoughts aligned. Moments afterward, the carriage halted. Inside, Mujin called out to the coachman, demanding to know why they had stopped. Again, he opened the door and asked, "What is it this time?" Suddenly, the Zhongshan 4 demons knelt in the road before him and shouted as one, "Boss!" The broad man cried out that they pledged their lifelong loyalty, vowing to serve the Manhwa clan until death, and implored him to take them in. Mujin stared down at them, incredulous. Had they lost their minds from the beating? Who did they think they were calling boss? The broad man shouted back, "We're not even 30 yet! Please take care of us, boss!" Mujin's expression shifted from skepticism to sheer astonishment. He reeled, voice cracking with disbelief as he bellowed, "What? You say you're not 30? Unbelievable!" Later, as the carriage continued to roll through the silent forest night, Mujin stared down at the 4 demons inside. He gave a side-eye to one of them and expressed his disbelief that they were younger than him, a 23-year-old, asking if everyone there had suffered energy deviation or something. The man with the iron club responded that they had never had that happen and asked what exactly Mujin found unbelievable. Mujin sighed and simply replied to forget it, then stated he could not wrap his head around how demonic arts users could become warriors of ruined households of the Orthodox sect, asking if that even made sense logically. One of the broad men, Cheol Muk, the eldest among the 4 demons at 21 years old, responded that his master always told him that being a demonic arts user was a way of living, an identity, not a faction or affiliation. Beside him, the man with the iron club, the 4th brother, No Sak, who was 18 years old, nodded and yelled out in agreement. Mujin sighed and responded that while that was not wrong, realistically speaking, what kind of Orthodox family would accept demonic arts users, as they would get dragged into scandals? Then the man with the sword, the 2nd brother, Dong Jiok, who was 20 years old, shouted as he responded, asking who dared to say such a thing and declaring they would smash their heads in for Mujin. Beside him, the 3rd brother, Jiang Tae, who was 19 years old, also shouted that they would tear their mouths. Mujin scoffed as he thought to himself that they were charging in so naively, reminding him of someone he was quite fond of. He then spoke out loud, saying that if they wanted to serve under another household, they must be willing to stake their lives on any order he gave, whether they liked it or not, that their personal freedom meant nothing, and they must obey like a dog for the honor of the household. He demanded to know if they understood, and in unison, the 4 demons shouted their affirmation, declaring they would devote themselves wholeheartedly. Mujin waved them off, as he placed his hand on his head and said, "Good grief. Fine, they could do as they wanted, that they were now warriors of the Yomhua clan." The 4 demons shouted once more in thanks. Mujin added that they should stop calling him boss and just call him young master. And again, the 4 demons shouted in unison that they understood. Later, deep in the night, they finally arrived at Do Young-soo's house. As the carriage stopped and Mujin was about to hop out, he took a glance at Do Young-soo's property and commented that it was quite extravagant, asking if that was his house. Do Young-soo responded nervously that it was and pleaded with Mujin to come inside. He shouted to one of the servants to open the gate. The servant approached and asked what was happening. Do Young-soo told him not to ask questions and to quickly prepare food in the annex building. Mujin butted in and said to forget that, asking what they were doing there, stating they needed to check the treasure room first. Do Young-soo responded politely that yes, they should go that way. As they walked in silence, Mujin thought to himself that this was how well Do Young-soo had been living using money he swindled. Then suddenly, someone stepped forward right in front of them. A man named Bi Sojin stood firmly in their path and asked what was the matter, Brother Do, and if something troubling had happened. Do Young-soo hurriedly approached Bi Sojin, telling him it was nothing and to go back inside. Bi Sojin responded that Do Young-soo knew there was nothing he could not tell him and demanded to know if these people were But before he could finish his words, Mujin cut him off with a loud sigh, saying that Do Young-soo told him to leave, so why was he still sticking his nose where it did not belong? Mujin judged from Bi Sojin's clothes that he must be one of that swindler's guests, and stated that guests should not meddle in household affairs. Bi Sojin's eyes narrowed as he went silent for a moment. Then suddenly, he extended his hand to his right, blocking Mujin's pathway, and said coldly that Mujin had quite the foul mouth for a young man. Cheol-muk from the back stepped forward and asked if he should deal with Bi Sojin. Do Young-soo immediately stopped Cheol-muk and shouted at him that no, this was a misunderstanding, that they were his guests. He turned to Bi Sojin and said he would introduce them, explaining that these were Zhongshan's 4 demons and the Yomhwa clan's first young master. After a few moments of silence, Bi Sojin smirked and responded that no wonder Mujin's tongue was so sharp, calling him the insane eldest son of the Yomhwa clan, an orthodox sect brat who runs around with lowlifes and intimidates civilians, calling it amusing. Mujin responded that if Bi Sojin was done being amused, he should move aside because they were busy. Bi Sojin turned his head toward Mujin and said as he grinned that calling oneself orthodox while running around with demonic arts users terrorizing commoners meant Mujin's grandfather must be weeping in his grave, calling him pathetic trash. Everyone paused after hearing Bi Sojin's last statement. Do Young-soo, panicking, tried to interject, but Bi Sojin cut him off as he pulled out his sword and declared that Do Young-soo should not worry, that he, Bi Sojin, was not the kind of shabby swordsman to lose to such scum. Do Young-soo's expression brightened as he heard Bi Sojin's declaration. From the back, No Sak started to draw his iron club and said he had had enough, pleading for permission to crush that bastard's jaw. Mujin grabbed his giant sword from the back and stopped No Sak, declaring, "I'll do it myself." He instantly jumped up high to the side, landing in an open space, and said that so the dog does know how to protect its owner. He looked directly at Bi Sojin and taunted, "Come here, mutt." Bi Sojin's expression twisted. After a few moments he jumped forward with his sword and attacked Mujin. Mujin managed to block the attack with his giant sword, but Bi Sojin kept swinging his sword violently. Mujin blocked them all. After a few moments of exchange, Mujin smirked as he blocked the attacks and commented that it was a swift sword style but Bi Sojin lacked strength. Mujin suddenly led Bi Sojin's sword toward the ground, catching Bi Sojin off guard. In an instant, Mujin lifted his sword, readying for an attack. As Mujin swung his giant sword horizontally, Bi Sojin barely dodged it by bending backwards. Mujin then swung the sword back for a follow-up attack. Bi Sojin blocked the follow-up attack with his sword. Then after a few moments his eyes widened as he noticed a crack on his sword and he shouted, "Gah! My sword?" On the side, Dong Jiok, watching the fight along with the other 4 demons and Do Young-soo, said it was over. No Sak agreed, stating once you start getting pushed back by Mujin, there is no recovering from it. He added that just from a glance, Mujin's sword was tougher than his iron rod, meaning it would break soon, either his sword or his skull. Do Young-soo could not believe what he was seeing and hearing, and muttered in shock. Then suddenly, a loud clash of steel echoed throughout the area as Bi Sojin's sword snapped in half. As the broken sword landed on the ground, Mujin pressed forward as he grinned. He smacked Bi Sojin right on the gut with the flat part of his sword. Bi Sojin flew a distance, tumbling across the ground until he crashed into a wall. Nearby, Dong Jiok, who was watching along with the other 4 demons and Do Young-soo, commented that it was as expected. The remaining brothers agreed with him as they nodded. Mujin turned his head toward them and shouted for them to throw him their iron club. No Sak responded with affirmation and complied. After a few moments, Mujin lifted the iron club up high as he stared down at Bi Sojin, who was struggling to get up from the ground. He said, "What did you say? My grandfather is crying in his grave." And with a wide, sinister grin, he added, "Fine. Then I'll make sure he can hear your screams from the grave right beside him." Bi Sojin lifted his head and tried to speak, but before he could continue, Mujin began to smack him repeatedly with the iron club. "Put your hand down. Put it down, you bastard. Your bones will snap." Mujin shouted as he continued to beat Bi Sojin, adding that it did not matter if the guy who was going to share a coffin with his grandfather broke a few bones. He then began laughing maniacally, his laughter echoing through the night. From the side, Dong Jiok remarked that the man over there, Mujin, who was currently beating Bi Sojin, appeared ready to die at any moment. At that moment, Do Young-soo suddenly intervened, rushing toward Mujin and shouting desperately, imploring him to spare Bi Sojin's life, and even offering to pay for it. Mujin paused briefly before responding with a simple question, "Really?" Do Young-soo, still shouting, explained that Bi Sojin had connections with the unorthodox martial heavens, and therefore, Allowing him to die within Do Young-soo's household was unacceptable. He pleaded repeatedly, promising to pay any amount Mujin demanded, even begging on his knees. Mujin, feigning surprise, responded that he had assumed Do Young-soo foolishly placed his hope in such a useless man, but then added with a wide, unsettling smile that Do Young-soo should have spoken up earlier. Observing this reaction, Do Young-soo muttered inwardly, shaken, that Mujin was clearly a madman. Later, as they entered Do Young-soo's residence, Mujin glanced around and commented that Do Young-soo appeared to have accumulated considerable wealth. He declared it was time to begin calculating compensation. He started by assigning a value of 500 gold ingots per life for the 4 men standing behind Do Young-soo. Internally, Do Young-soo protested, recalling that Mujin had earlier suggested recruiting them into the Yeomwa clan as warriors, so why was he now demanding payment for their lives? Mujin then continued, listing 200 gold ingots as compensation for Do Young-soo's limbs, 300 gold ingots for his own life, and a staggering 1,000 gold ingots for his loud-mouthed brother, whom Mujin disparaged as arrogant. Finally, for the psychological damage and wasted physical effort Mujin claimed to have suffered that day, he demanded 3,000 gold ingots, adding, with an air of generosity, that this amount was actually cheap. To simplify matters, Mujin instructed Do Young-soo to hand over everything he possessed and asked if he had any objections. Do Young-soo, now crying, stammered that he had none. Inwardly, he cursed Mujin as worse than any bandit gang he had ever encountered. As the 4 demons began collecting the gold ingots, Mujin directed them to leave nothing behind. Then, noticing a folding screen nearby, he approached it, observing it closely while wondering aloud, though only to himself, whether the strange aura emanating from it was real or imagined. Do Young-soo, stepping up behind him, asked if Mujin liked the folding screen. Mujin replied indifferently that he did not, to which Do Young-soo responded that Mujin's discernment was expected of him, explaining that the screen was the work of the renowned master Jiang Sosin. He added humbly that, concerned the young master's room might seem too bare, he had prepared it as a gift, and if Mujin wished, he could take it with him. Mujin turned back, considered the offer, and accepted without hesitation. Within, Do Young-soo seethed, branding Mujin a greedy brat. Once everything including the gold had been loaded into the carriage, Mujin turned to Do Young-soo and asked whether he would still need his carriage, reasoning that since Do Young-soo would no longer be traveling much, he might as well take it. Do Young-soo bowed deferentially, assuring him it would be an honor for such a valuable item to serve Mujin well. With that, Mujin shouted excitedly for the group to move out. As the carriage began to roll away, Do Young-soo bowed deeply once more and bid them farewell. Mujin, leaning out, yelled back that Do Young-soo should live a righteous life, and that they would meet again. Upon hearing this, Do Young-soo trembled violently. "See you next time?" he thought in despair. "You've already robbed me blind. Are you even human?" He cried out to the heavens, questioning what sin he could possibly have committed to deserve such merciless torment at the hands of this lunatic. Later that day, as the sun rose, the group finally arrived at the Yeomwa clan. Masok, standing at the entrance, was utterly stunned as he watched the 4 demons unload a massive pile of gold ingots. He stammered in disbelief, demanding to know what had happened, and then, turning to Mujin with sudden alarm, asked whether he had resorted to murder to obtain such wealth. Mujin scoffed, denying it outright, and reminded Masok that he had previously complained about the clan's financial shortage. He instructed Masok to store the gold properly. Then, changing the subject, he asked Masok to estimate the ages of the men accompanying him. Masok, scrutinizing them, replied that despite their robust builds and formidable appearances, they all looked to be well over 40. Mujin smirked, saying he would relay that assessment to them. They would appreciate it. He then inquired where Chief Do and Elder Jo were, noting their conspicuous absence upon his arrival. Masok quickly explained that very important guests had arrived, and the 2 elders were entertaining them in the reception hall. They had instructed Masok to escort Mujin there the moment he returned. Mujin reacted with suspicion, asking whether yet another scammer had come to swindle the clan. Masok urgently denied it, warning him not to lay a hand on these particular visitors, and urging him to hurry. Bristling, Mujin muttered under his breath about what mischief the elders might have gotten into this time. Upon entering the reception hall, Elder Jo and Chief Do immediately brightened at the sight of him and warmly welcomed the young master. Elder Jo introduced the 3 guests as the leaders of merchant groups who had generously supported the Yeomwa clan during its darkest days. The first guest, Peng Kwano of the Pengyang merchant group, bowed respectfully and said he had heard rumors of the hidden dragon's awakening and now saw for himself that the reports were true. The second, Dong Guanyeo of the Muryong merchant union, also bowed and expressed relief at seeing Mu Jin alive and well after enduring hardship. The third, Huang Yo-chung, master of the Golden Finance Manor, added that it had been far too long since he last paid his respects. Mu Jin bowed in return, introducing himself formally as Hua Mu Jin of the Yomhua clan, and thanking them for their visit. After some pleasantries, Mu Jin cut straight to the point, asking whether they had come to collect the debts the Yomhua clan owed them. The atmosphere in the hall shifted abruptly. Peng Quan-o raised a placating hand and insisted they had not come to pressure him for repayment, only to offer congratulations upon learning he had awakened. He apologized if their presence had caused any discomfort. Mu Jin, however, maintained a serious tone. He began by expressing sincere gratitude for their past support. Yet, he insisted, proper debt management required clarity, since he had only recently regained his senses and remained unfamiliar with the clan's current financial standing. He requested full disclosure of the exact amounts owed before any discussion of repayment schedules could proceed. Even as Chief Do attempted to intervene, clearly uneasy, Huang Yo-chung acknowledged Mu Jin's correctness and reluctantly agreed to disclose approximate figures. Peng Quan-o stated that the Pengyang Merchant Group was owed 5,300 nyang. Huang Yo-chung reported that the Golden Finance Manor was owed 3,200 nyang. Dong Guanyeo confirmed that the Muryong Merchant Union was owed 1,900 nyang. Mu Jin tallied the total aloud, 10,400 nyang. A heavy silence fell over the room. Then, Peng Quan-o spoke again, confessing that another matter required disclosure. They had long resisted pressure from the Changhua Merchant Group, specifically concerning the rights to the debts owed by the Yomhua clan. Though aware that surrendering those rights would gravely harm the Yomhua clan, they had fought the Changhua Group's advances, until recently. After the duel, he revealed, the Changhua Merchant Group escalated its tactics, using overwhelming financial power to strangle the three allied groups, monopolizing their trade goods, severing ties with their partner merchants, and even poaching their branch managers with utter shamelessness. Elder Zhou, hearing this, shot to his feet in shock, exclaiming that he had never imagined such underhanded maneuvers were taking place. Huang Yo-chung added, voice heavy with shame, that their resistance had reached its limit. Though they were on the verge of capitulating and surrendering the debt rights, they felt morally obligated to warn the Yomhua clan one final time before doing so. Mu Jin listened in silence, then bowed deeply and sincerely. He expressed profound gratitude for their unwavering loyalty, acknowledging how heavily their sacrifices weighed upon his conscience. While many had fled the clan when fortunes turned, only Elder Zhou, Chief Do, and these three merchant leaders had remained steadfast. Though he admitted he was no scholar, he declared with solemn conviction that debts of gratitude must be repaid in full, and he pledged, then and there, to settle every obligation the Yomhua clan owed them immediately. Dong Guanyeo, overwhelmed, stood up and cried out in disbelief, questioning whether such a promise could truly be fulfilled. Mu Jin gave a simple, quiet, and then, his voice dropping to a chilling tone, deliberate timbre, added that, in return for the interest and all the help we've received, I will free your groups from the clutches of the Changhua Merchant Group. After hearing Mu Jin's words, the three merchant leaders reacted in visible shock. Their eyes widened instantly, and Peng Quan-o released a breath he had not realized he was holding. With clear relief in his voice, he asked whether this meant that young Master Mu Jin was truly willing to use force on their behalf. Mu Jin answered without hesitation that he was. At Mu Jin's side, Chief Do cried out in alarm, his voice trembling as he asked what Mu Jin was talking about, and whether he even understood who was backing their enemies. In panic, he revealed that it was the Kongdong sect, one of the strongest sects in the entire Marim. Mu Jin merely turned his head toward Chief Do and replied flatly that it was simply those old geezers backing them. Huang Yoqiong then raised his hand calmly and told Chief Do not to worry. He explained that if they simply erased the debt, the enemy would not be able to interfere any further. To them, that alone was already an enormous blessing, and there was no reason for the Yomhua clan to clash directly with the Kongdong sect. He added with clear admiration that a sleeping dragon had truly awakened, and thanked Mu Jin sincerely, saying that his heart was finally at ease as he laughed in relief. As time passed, the three merchant leaders prepared to depart outside the Yomhua clan estate. They bowed in farewell, and Huang Yoqiong formally stated that they would take their leave and wished prosperity upon the clan. The elders and Mu Jin bowed in return, and Mu Jin wished them safe travels. Once the merchants had left, Mu Jin muttered quietly about the Cheonghua Merchant Group. He then turned directly to Chief Do and ordered him to gather information on them. He demanded everything, starting from their finances and operating regions to their trade goods and even their ties with the Kongdong sect. Chief Do cried out in disbelief and asked whether Mu Jin had truly been serious about what he had said earlier. Mu Jin responded with irritation, remarking that Chief Do had not stopped nagging since earlier and questioning whether he truly thought it had been a joke. He reminded him that grudges and kindness had to be settled clearly, and that everyone had already heard what those people had done. If they let them continue, they would try to seize their throats next time. At this point, Mujin declared that it was already all or nothing. He added that if over a dozen years of support had only led to this outcome, then those people would no longer help them anyway. With a faint smirk, Mujin said that they should properly repay them at least once, and remarked that they would probably dismiss it as the mad bravado of a lunatic. In his thoughts, he simply noted that they would see how it turned out. At that moment, Cheomuk approached from the side and reported that the tasks Mujin had ordered were all complete. Mujin turned to him with approval and told everyone to gather around. He instructed them to offer their greetings, explaining that the two before them were the clan's elder and chief steward. Both elders were visibly stunned at the newcomer's appearance. Chief Do exclaimed in confusion and asked who they were. Mujin formally introduced them as warriors, joining the clan from that day onward. The famous young men of Zhongshan known as Zhongshan's Four Demons. Cheomuk bowed deeply and asked that they be looked after. The elders were clearly shaken, and Mujin added that they should not be shocked yet because there was something even more surprising. He revealed that all of them were younger than he was. Hearing this, Chief Do shouted in total disbelief. In his mind, he could not accept that such a thing was even possible. At that moment, Nosak's stomach growled loudly, and he complained that he was starving, and suggested that they go tear into some meat. Jianghu responded by calmly wondering why everyone was staring at them so blankly. Nosak then explained that it was obviously because they were overwhelmed by their presence. Chief Do spun back toward Mujin in panic, and shouted that Mujin must not know the fearsome reputation of Zhongshan's Four Demons, and demanded to know why he had brought them into the clan without any consultation. Mujin paused for a brief moment, before replying coldly that they had not consulted him either when they tried to sneak his younger siblings out. He stated clearly that if he approved, they stayed, and if he did not, they would be expelled. He reminded them that he was the one who would become the next clan patriarch. He then turned toward Masak and ordered him to go buy a cow. Masak hesitated awkwardly, trying to respond. Chief Do immediately cut in and shouted that they had no money left, reminding Mujin that more than 10,000 gold had just been used to repay their debts. Later, Mujin brought the elders to one of the Yomhwa clan's storage vaults. Inside were all the treasures they had plundered from Du Yongsu. Upon seeing the vast collection, both elders froze in shock. Chief Do stammered in disbelief as he stared at the piles of wealth. Mujin casually explained that the scammer had quite a fortune hidden away. Chief Do stared at him in alarm and began to suspect something more serious. Mujin calmly shook his head and reassured him that he had not killed the man and had only taken what was rightfully his. Chief Do then pointed in trembling disbelief at a particular folding screen and demanded to know what it was. Mujin replied that he had been told it was one of Jiang Sosan's pieces and that it had been given to him. The moment that name was spoken, Chief Do's entire body began to shake in horror. Mujin added that even if they sold it cheaply, it would still fetch at least 90 gold, which was why he had taken it. Chief Do could only murmur that it looked genuine. Mujin then asked casually whether that would be enough to buy meat. Chief Do answered that it was more than enough. Mujin immediately told him to stop talking and go buy it. The next morning at the Yomhwa clan training grounds, Mujin gathered the Yomhwa warriors, the Four Demons, and his younger siblings at dawn. He explained that they were all likely wondering why he had summoned them so early. After everything that had happened recently, he had realized that they desperately needed special training. He stated that the foundation of swordsmanship was the body that wielded the sword, and that no matter how great a martial art was, it was useless if the body was weak. Starting that day, they would begin special physical training. With narrowed eyes and a sharpened tone, Mujin declared that he would personally oversee it, and warned that he hoped there would be no dropouts. At their feet, he pointed out sacks of rice weighing 144 kilograms each, and declared that from that day onward, those sacks would be their loyal training partners. He made it very clear that this was not food, and warned that if he caught anyone eating it, they were dead. He added that there was always someone foolish enough to try. At the side, Dojin looked toward her sister Soyan and quietly wondered why their sack looked so much smaller, as if it weighed only 15 kilograms at most. Nearby, Cheolbo-in spoke out loud and asked what exactly they were supposed to do with the sacks. Mujin grinned and simply answered with the short command, "Hoist it on your shoulders." Cheolbo-in froze in shock, muttering in disbelief. The warrior behind him laughed nervously and remarked that it would take 2 men just to lift one together. Mujin's expression instantly turned menacing as he told them to shut up and pick it up, unless they wanted to be beaten senseless. He grabbed his sword and warned that while it was not sharp enough to slice cleanly, a single hit would crush every bone in their bodies. Then he forced them to choose between lifting the sack or sparring with him. The moment those words left his mouth, Cheolmok immediately heaved a sack onto his shoulder. As Cheolmok's body visibly trembled under the weight, Mujin approached him and questioned whether the 4 demons were playing around. He leaned in close and whispered that practitioners of demonic arts should not be this embarrassing, ordering each of them to lift 3 sacks unless they preferred to spar with him. A few moments later, all 4 of the demons were carrying 3 sacks of rice apiece. At the edge of the training grounds, Elder Joe and Chief Do arrived just in time to witness the scene. Their eyes widened in total shock as Chief Do demanded to know what in the world was happening. Elder Joe followed by asking what Mujin was planning to do. Mujin shouted toward the warriors with fierce approval, and declared that if they decided to lift it, then they truly could lift it. He told them to throw away the pathetic thought of questioning whether they could do it, and reminded them that only death awaited failure. So there was nothing in this world that was truly impossible. As he watched the warriors struggle under the crushing weight, Mujin burst into manic laughter and shouted for them to begin sitting and standing. He ordered 200 repetitions, and commanded everyone to follow him as he began counting loudly. As the warriors continued their rigorous training, Mujin, who was training with them at the front, shouted for them to do push-ups. He commanded them to tighten their stomachs and push up, calling them bastards and asking if they wanted to die. Cheolmok gritted his teeth and thought to himself that his entire body felt as if it were collapsing from the legs upward. He resolved that if he could not endure it, young Master Mujin might beat him to death. He then screamed as he pushed himself to his limits. On the side, Elder Joe watched Dojin and Soyan, who were also participating in the training, and thought to himself that he did not know what kind of training method this was, and that even watching it was exhausting. He wondered if, with such small bodies, they could even withstand it. Then Mujin shouted once more with a commanding tone, telling the warriors they acted like martial artists but had only wasted the clan's food until then, and were now whining over that level of training. He declared that people like that did not deserve to live, that anyone who complained was going to die, and ordered them to keep pushing. Later that afternoon, the rigorous training continued. One of the warriors, as he tried to rise up while the sack was still on his back, pushed one last time with his trembling body, and murmured that he had reached 200. He then suddenly passed out and fell to the ground. In front of him, Mujin stared down and scoffed, remarking that the whole day was gone just from the warm-up. He asked if they wanted to practice martial arts with such pathetic stamina, and declared that the day's training ended there. However, he added that from then on, they would become one with the rice sacks. He told them to eat with them, train with them, and even sleep with them, carrying them always until he told them to put them down. He then called out to one of the warriors. Cheolmok responded. Mujin instructed him to tie all of them along with their rice sacks using rope, and warned that anyone who untied it would have their life untied as well, and to remember that. Cheolmok thought to himself that it was strange, but that day of all days he wished he could see his mother's face. As Mujin walked away, he turned towards Masak and told him that from that day onward, he must make sure everyone got beef for every meal. Masak instantly responded affirmatively and asked if he should prepare bathwater. Mujin responded that he would tell him later. As he entered his quarters and closed the door, he immediately slumped on his bed and fell asleep instantly. Later that night in the dining hall, everyone was sitting down in front of the table eating while the sacks were still attached to their backs. Then, Nosak noticed something as he looked at his chopsticks with his trembling hands. He turned towards Jianghu beside him and remarked that it was strange, as they had only trained their legs, but his hands were shaking. Jianghu responded that it was happening to him too, and that he had been wondering about it as well. Another warrior added that this had never happened even when they trained with their previous master, and others agreed. The next day, the training continued. They began doing push-ups with the sacks of rice attached to their backs as they counted each rep. Mujin shouted as he was also doing push-ups, calling out to someone in the third row, calling him a brat, asking if he wanted to die, and ordering him to keep it straight. He announced there were still 120 reps left and told them to focus. On the side, Cheol Boin, who was also doing the training, watched the other warriors in disbelief and thought to himself that they were all doing this, and wondered what kind of monsters they were. The next day, they began walking in the streets in a squat position as Mujin commanded them, saying they were all becoming ducks and telling them to follow him and quack. The nearby citizens watched them in disbelief. Dong Jiok shouted quack quack and then thought to himself what the hell this was. The following day, they began lifting the sack of rice up high for a long time. Mujin shouted at them to push faster and asked if they wanted to train all day again. He warned that anyone slower than him would get another sack. As Dojin and Soyan simultaneously counted their reps, Mujin, on the side struggling as well, looked at his young siblings and thought to himself that the kids were keeping up far better than expected. With a faint grin, he considered raising the difficulty. The next day, they arrived at a nearby waterfall. Cheolmok exclaimed in surprise, recognizing the place. Mujin turned towards them and spoke with a smirk on his face, confirming it and asking if they were all hot. They looked at the wild torrent of water down below as they stood on the cliff. Mujin then told them they would cross it. Cheolmuk looked far ahead to the waterfall. Nearby, Soyeon grinned and said excitedly that it was a waterfall and that it must be refreshing. Beside her, Dojin called her out with a nervous tone. Soyeon added that she remembered he could not swim. Dojin muttered in disbelief after seeing Soyeon's reaction, noting that her way of speaking had changed after all the training. Soyeon asked if they should tell Mujin about this. On the side, Elder Joe shouted in alarm, telling young Master Mujin it was impossible because the current was far too fast. Beside him, Chief Do also shouted, adding that people were known to die there, and that it was dangerous even for people crossing without carrying anything. Mujin turned towards them and responded that the old men worried too much. He told them not to worry, as everything had been tested before they proceeded. Chief Do exclaimed, asking when he had ever tested that kind of training. Then Mujin announced to everyone, giving them a choice to either cross the river or fight him. Without warning, Mujin jumped off the cliff and added that he was going ahead. No-Sok turned towards Cheolmuk and asked what they should do, noting that Jang Tae had already gone ahead. Cheolmuk looked down below with a nervous expression and responded that he knew the chances of survival were higher there than fighting young Master Mujin, and that he was going too. They both jumped, with No-Sok responding that he would go as well. Then the other warriors also followed as they jumped while shouting in resignation, saying it was do or die. One warrior above hesitated to jump as he looked down from the cliff, cursing in fear. Behind him, Dong Jiok told him to move aside if he was not going to jump. On the side, Soyeon began to run near the cliff and looked back at her brother, shouting a challenge and saying she was going first. Dojin shouted for her to wait. As Soyeon jumped off the cliff, Dojin began to think to himself as he gritted his teeth that he could never say something like that to Mujin, but that he was also a warrior of the Yeomhwa clan. Then suddenly Dojin began to run towards the cliff and jumped off, declaring that this would not make him back down. As he landed in the water, the elders above shouted in disbelief for young Master Dojin. As Mujin led them crossing the river with a crazy current, he shouted for them to move their arms and legs non-stop, warning that if they fell, they really would die. After a few moments, Dojin managed to climb out of the water. As he gasped for air, he thought to himself that he could do it, and that even he could do something like that. As he tried to swim, his mind began to falter, but he repeated to himself that even he could do it. Then, he began sinking into the water, still insisting to himself that even he could do it. As Elder Joe noticed Dojin struggling, he shouted that he was getting swept away. He then shouted directly towards Mujin that young Master Dojin was being swept away. As Dojin struggled in the water, Jang Tae shouted excitedly that he would go. He rushed towards Dojin as fast as he could and, in a few moments, managed to grab him. He told Dojin to breathe and to take a deep breath and hold on tight when he said so. He observed that it seemed too late to get out then, so they would charge straight through. As they got close to the waterfall, he told Dojin to get ready. Dojin was confused and exclaimed in alarm. They then fell over the waterfall. Jang Tae shouted for him to take a breath now. On the cliff, the elders immediately looked down below for them. Chief Do yelled for young Master Dojin. Elder Joe pointed and said they were over there. Down below, Jang Tae managed to bring Dojin to the rock shore nearby. He told Dojin he had done very well. As Dojin gasped for air, he thanked Jang Tae for saving him. Jang Tae responded that it was nothing. Then Mujin appeared behind them and called out to his brother, asking if he was okay. He approached his little brother and asked if he had slammed into anything. Dojin responded that he was fine, and that luckily, Jang Tae had come to help him. On the side, Jang Tae thought to himself in disbelief, wondering when young Master Mujin had shown up and started following them. Mujin then told his little brother not to push himself too hard. He said it was good that he was doing this with them, but it all became meaningless if something happened to him. Dojin paused as he looked at his big brother. After a few moments, he responded that he could not stay a child forever, and that he would stay with Mujin until the end. He raised his voice and added that only then could he become a proper martial artist of the Yeomhwa clan. Mujin sighed in relief and smiled at his little brother's statement. On the side, Jang Tae exclaimed in admiration for young Master Dojin. Dojin thanked him. At the top of the cliff, both elders also sighed in relief. As time passed, their rigorous training continued. They climbed a mountain with their hands, while a sack of rice was still attached to their backs. Mujin, leading them ahead, looked down and shouted that if they fell from there would not even be any bones left of them, and ordered them to hurry up and crawl their way up. One warrior who was struggling to climb up looked at him and thought to himself that Mujin was definitely a crazy lunatic, and that he never should have followed him. Then suddenly, he lost his footing and started to fall, shouting in alarm. But he somehow managed to grab onto the rope that was attached to Dong Jiok's sack of rice. Dong Jiok grunted and demanded to know what was happening. The warrior began to tear up as he trembled and pleaded for help. Dong Jiok, who was struggling to carry the extra weight, cursed and shouted for him to stop panicking and grab the rock in front of him, calling him an idiot. Time passed. As they ran on the streets while still carrying the sack of rice on their backs, Mujin shouted at them to run, warning that anyone who fell behind would have to carry him on their back and run. Then a child who was watching them asked his mother if those people were death row convicts. His mother responded that she heard they were warriors of the Jianghu clan. As they continued to run, both Dojin and Soyeon were catching their breath heavily. Then Soyeon's vision began to blur. As she caught her breath, she passed out and fell to the ground. On her side, Dojin called out to her. Elder Joe hurriedly rushed towards her and shouted for Lady Soyeon, asking if she was all right. Soyeon spoke faintly, asking Elder Cho to carry her for a bit and to hurry. Elder Joe was taken aback. He instantly carried her. Soyeon looked back at No Sak and Dong Jiok, smirked, and gave them a thumbs up. Both of them were confused and paused. Then, Mujin glared at them and asked what they were doing. He said he would not stop them if they planned on collapsing like a little girl, but they would stake their lives doing that. He then shouted for them to start running. As they arrived at the estate, all the warriors were lying down or sitting on the hay as they caught their breath. One warrior who was sitting against the wall caught his breath. Dong Jiok approached him, looked down at him, and told him he always lagged behind during training and could not even finish the required laps. He asked how long he was planning to stay like that, and how long he had to keep suffering because of him. He told him that if he did not think he could last, he should just crawl out on his own and stop dragging other people down. The warrior did not respond and lowered his head. Dong Jiok raised his voice and demanded to know if he was even listening. Finally, the warrior spoke, saying that Mujin had said he would kill them. Dong Jiok asked what he meant. The warrior added that Dong Jiok thought he was doing this because he wanted to, but trying to say that to young Master Mujin. Dong Jiok cut him off, concluding that the warrior was scared Mujin would beat him to death if he brought it up, so he could not say it. He asked if that was why he was always lying around like a rotten corpse. He said that looking at him, it was obvious he was not cut out to live as a warrior, and that he would just end his life nice and smooth right then. The warrior shrieked, staggered back, and shouted, asking why Dong Jiok was doing this. Then, Chelbo-in grabbed Dong Jiok, trying to stop him, and told him to stop, as not everyone could be like him. Suddenly, Dong Jiok pulled back his arm and punched Chelbo-in right in the gut, exclaiming that then the warrior should not be messing around about being a warrior. Chelbo-in fell to the ground, coughing heavily. Dong Jiok added, looking down at him, that he should stand up, and that he would start by killing him. As he was about to throw another punch, Chelmuk yelled for him to stop. He said that, as Chelbo-in had said, that guy was doing his best in his own way. Since he had come to the Jianghu clan, he was their brother as well, and Dong Jiok should leave it at that. Dong Jiok turned his head towards Chelmuk and shouted, questioning if trash like that was his brother's. He asked if Chelmuk called them brothers after seeing everything with his own eyes all that time, and how long he was going to keep doing such idiotic stuff. He demanded to know if Chelmuk really believed they could become strong like that, and said this was not what they wanted. Chelmuk responded calmly that young Master Mujin had been swinging the sword a few years longer than them. He said everyone took things differently, but it was definitely not as meaningless as Dong Jiok thought, so he should say things like that only after he had surpassed Mujin. Dong Jiok scoffed as he walked away and said directly to the warrior sitting against the wall that if he caused him to suffer again, he would die by his hand before young Master Mujin's. Later that night, as Dong Jiok groaned while trying to stand up from sitting outside, he walked and muttered to himself about the toilet being so far away. As he walked, he heard something nearby and wondered who was out there at that hour. As he tried to hide behind a bush, he found Mujin training with his giant sword alone late at night. As he watched him training, he muttered to himself in recognition that it was young Master Mujin. He observed that it was not merely speed. Mujin was overflowing with strength, yet his movements were fluid. Dong Jiok thought to himself in disbelief that they were not even far apart in age, so he could not comprehend how Mujin could possibly wield swordsmanship like that. He wondered if that was what they called the realm of martial talent. Then Mujin suddenly stopped and looked directly at where Dong Jiok was hiding. He demanded to know who was there and ordered the person to come out before he cracked their skull open. Dong Jiok then emerged from the bushes and stammered that it was him, young Master Mujin. Mujin asked what he was doing there. Dong Jiok explained that he had been on his way back from the restroom and ended up there, insisting he had not been trying to watch on purpose. Mujin responded that it did not matter, as he was bored anyway and this worked out great. He then ordered Dong Jiok to put the rice sack down and pick up a sword next to him. Dong Jiok stammered in confusion but, after a few moments, complied. He put the sack on the ground, drew his sword, and said, "All right then." Mujin told him calmly to come. Without warning, Dong Jiok rushed forward. As he swung his sword, Mujin blocked it with a loud clang that echoed across the training ground. Dong Jiok gritted his teeth and continued to attack, but Mujin easily parried every strike. Dong Jiok's eyes widened as he thought to himself that he had known it would not work, but he was shocked by the feeling of his own sword. He swung again, astonished that he was moving faster than ever. Mujin blocked it easily again, scoffed, and remarked that Dong Jiok was finally somewhat usable. However, in an instant, Mujin appeared right behind him, ready to swing his sword. As he attacked, he pointed out that Dong Jiok was too focused on looking straight ahead. Dong Jiok immediately fell to the ground but instantly got back up and jumped back to maintain distance. He gritted his teeth and grunted in frustration, thinking it was just as he had expected. Mujin scoffed and smirked, noting that Dong Jiok had gone down in one hit before, but now his toughness was finally becoming somewhat usable too. Dong Jiok paused, feeling the spot on his back where he had been struck. He muttered to himself that the impact was still great, but it was no longer enough to render him unable to move in a single blow. Mujin then turned around and said that was enough for the day, announcing he was leaving and that Dong Jiok should go and rest. Dong Jiok immediately bowed and said, "Yes, sir, please rest well." After a few moments, he lifted his hand and muttered to himself in dawning realization. The next day, their training continued. Mujin announced that they would be working their abdomens. He commanded everyone to lift the rice sack between their legs and hang from a wooden bar. They all hung while lifting the sacks between their feet. Dong Jiok gave his all, training hard and persisting relentlessly. The other warriors watched him in awe, murmuring among themselves that it was amazing they could do that with a rice sack wedged between their legs, and that the trainees looked even more fired up than before. Later that afternoon, they began to run in the streets as part of their training. The warrior who always lagged behind was heavily breathing and about to pass out. He thought to himself that he could not collapse there again. Then, another warrior pulled his rice sack back. It was Dong Jiok who told him to endure it, as there was not much left. Mujin noticed this, looked back, and a smile began to form on his face. And so, about a month passed. Mujin announced to the warriors that they had all held out well and that, as of that day, the special training was over. He told everyone to undo the ropes and set the sacks down. The warriors roared in cheers upon hearing the command. Mujin smirked and added that he was sorry to rain on their parade, but they would be doing the same training every year during the summer and winter seasons. He stated the next training would be that winter, just a few months away. If there was any consolation, he explained that training would be easier than this one because they had experienced it once already. He emphasized that the experience was just that valuable. He declared the training ended there, but warned them not to forget that a strong body becomes a strong sword. He shouted to confirm if they understood, and the warriors responded in unison. Then, Mujin grabbed his sword from his back. He drew it, and declared that starting immediately, he would conduct practical sparring training to deepen their experience to another level. He said when he called a name, that person should take whatever weapon they wanted and step forward. Hearing this, the warriors were shocked and froze where they stood. Their joy did not last even a moment. They were beaten senseless and knocked unconscious, enduring an endless cycle of pain that felt like eternity. But that arduous time became experience, and experience brought new change. And so the bandits that were once called Zhongshan's Four Demons had now become the new martial arts instructors of the Manhwa clan. Just like that, the Manhwa clan quietly, but swiftly, began to gradually regain their former glory which had brightly lit up Xichang long ago. As time passed, in the training yard, young Master Dojin sparred with Nosak. He launched a kick. Nosak blocked it and called out, "Good young master, try rotating your supporting foot at the moment of impact. You'll deliver a stronger hit." From afar, the elders observed. Chief Du murmured, "Look at that. It seems young Master Dojin has regained his old self." Elder Joe nodded. "You're right. What a relief. It's been a while since we've seen that face." A pause. Who would have thought he'd get along so well with Zhongshan's Four Demon? Chief Du added, "But more than that, the biggest thing is that young Master Mujin came to his senses and stabilized the clan. Things are going so well it almost scares me." Elder Joe sighed. "You can say that again. Sometimes it still looks like his madness flares up, but I wonder if he'll come out of the storage today." Inside the storage house, Mujin sat cross-legged at the center of the room, circulating his chi in deep meditation. As the turbulent energy around him gradually stilled, he opened his eyes. Is this the fourth day now? His gaze fixed on the folding screen before him. Ornate, ancient, deceptively still. As expected, it wasn't some ordinary folding screen. The stronger I pour out my inner energy, the more powerfully it pushes back with even greater force. A slow, fierce smile spread across his face, and added, "Then let's see who wins."